It is like the familiar cases in which one becomes so wrapped up in viewing a beautiful work of art, or in listening to a beautiful musical rendition, that he or she forgets all about the sights and sounds of the world outside. One sometimes gets into this same condition when reading an interesting book, or when witnessing an interesting play. When the psychic powers are concentrated upon any one channel of vision, the others fail to register a clear impression. The same rule holds good on the astral plane, as on the physical. There are certain psychic conditions which are especially conducive to the manifestation of clairvoyant phenomena, as all students of the subject know very well. These conditions are somewhat hard to induce, at least until the clairvoyant has had considerable experience and practice. But, in the state of sleep, the person induces the desired conditions, in many cases, though he is not consciously doing so. As might naturally be expected, therefore, the majority of the recorded cases of clairvoyance have occurred when the clairvoyant person has been asleep. I should also state, once more, that in many cases in which the clairvoyant has witnessed the appearance of another person, as in the cases such as I have just mentioned, there is always the possibility of the person having actually appeared in his astral body, unconsciously to himself of course. No one but a skilled occultist is able to distinguish between cases of this kind. The line between this class of clairvoyance and astral appearance is very thin, and, in fact, the two classes of phenomena shade and blend into each other. In reality, when one gets down to bottom principles, there is very little difference between the actual appearance in the astral body, and the strong projection of one's presence by means of will, conscious or unconscious, along the lines of awakening the clairvoyant vision of others. To attempt to explain the slight points of difference here, would only involve the student in a mass of technical description which would tend to confuse, rather than to enlighten him. From this I refrain. Lesson 11. Clairvoyance of the past. The third great class of clairvoyant phenomena, known as time clairvoyance, is divided into two subclasses, as follows. 1. Past time clairvoyance and 2. Future time clairvoyance. The characteristics of each of these subclasses is indicated by its name. Past time clairvoyance, as indicated by the name, is that class of clairvoyant phenomena which is concerned with the perception of facts, events and happenings of past time. Whether the happening is that of 5 minutes ago, or of 5,000 years ago, the principles involved are precisely the same. One is no more or less wonderful than is the other. Many students confess themselves perplexed when they are first confronted with this class of phenomena. While they find it comparatively easy to see how by astral vision the clairvoyant is able to sense events happening at that moment, though thousands of miles away from the observer, they cannot at first understand how one can see a thing no longer in existence, but which disappeared from sight thousands of years ago. Naturally, they ask to be informed how this is possible, before proceeding to develop the faculty itself. Believing that this question is now being asked by you, the student of these lessons, I shall pause for a few moments and show you just how this wonderful thing becomes possible to the clairvoyant. In the first place, it would undoubtedly be impossible to perceive a thing, even by astral vision, if it had entirely disappeared at some time in the past. This would be beyond all natural powers, astral as well as physical. But, as a matter of fact, the things of the past have not entirely disappeared, but, on the contrary, while having disappeared on the physical plane they still exist on the astral plane. I shall endeavor to explain this wonderful fact of nature to you in plain terms, although it belongs to one of the most mysterious classes of the occult facts of the universe. In the occult teachings we find many references to the Akashic records, or what is sometimes called the records of the astral light. Without going into technical occult definitions and explanations, I will say to you that the gist of this occult teaching is that in that high form of the universal substance which is called the universal ether there is found to be recorded all the happenings of the entire world cycle of which the present time is a part. All that has happened from the very beginning of this world cycle, millions of years ago, is preserved on these astral records, and may be read by the advanced clairvoyant or other person possessing occult powers of this kind. These records perish only with the termination of a world cycle, which will not happen for millions of years yet to come. To those who cannot accept the reasonableness of this occult fact, I would say that there are analogies to be found on other planes of natural manifestation. For instance, as astronomy teaches us, a star may be blotted out of existence, and yet its light will persist long after, perhaps until the end of world time, traveling along at the rate of 186,000 miles each second. The light that we now see coming from the distant stars has left those stars many years ago, in some cases thousands of years ago. We see them not as they are now, but as they were at the time the ray of light left them. Many years ago the astronomers inform us that if one of these stars had been, transcriber's note, text missing from original, sands, of years ago, we would still see it as in actual existence. In fact, it is believed that some of these stars which we see twinkling at night have actually been blotted out hundreds of years ago. We will not be aware of this fact until the light rays suddenly cease reaching us, after their journey of billions of miles and hundreds of years. A star blotted out of existence today would be seen by our children, and children's children. The heat from a stove will be felt in a room long after the stove has been removed from it. A room will long contain the odor of something that has been removed from it. It is said that in one of the old mosques of Persia there may be perceived the faint odor of the musk that was exposed the hundreds of years ago. The very walls are saturated with the pungent odor. Again, is it not wonderful that our memories preserve the images of the sounds and forms which were placed there perhaps 50 years and more ago? How do these memory images survive and exist? Though we may have thought of the past thing for half a lifetime, yet, suddenly its image flashes into our consciousness. Surely this is as wonderful as the Akashic records, though its commonness makes it lose its wonderful appearance to us. Camille Flammarion, the eminent French astronomer, in a book written over 25 years ago, and which is now out of print, I believe, pictured a possible condition of affairs in which a disembodied soul would be able to perceive events that happened in the past, by simply taking a position in space in which he would be able to catch the light waves that emanated from a distant planet at that particular time in the past, the happenings of which he wanted to perceive. The little book was called Lumen. I advise you to read it, if you can find it in your public libraries. Another writer has written somewhat along the same lines. I herewith give you a quotation from him, that you may get the idea he wishes to express. It will help you in your conception of the Akashic records. He says, when we see anything, whether it be the book we hold in our hands, or a star millions of miles away, we do so by means of a vibration in the ether, commonly called a ray of light, which passes from the object seen to our eyes. Now the speed with which this vibration passes is so great, about 186,000 miles in a second, that when we are considering any object in our own world we may regard it as practically instantaneous. When, however, we come to deal with interplanetary distances we have to take the speed of light into consideration, for an appreciable period is occupied in traversing these vast spaces. For example, it takes 8 minutes and a quarter for light to travel to us from the sun, so that when we look at the solar orb we see it by means of a ray of light which left it more than 8 minutes ago. From this follows a very curious result. The ray of light by which we see the sun can obviously report to us only the state of affairs which existed in that luminary when it started on its journey, and would not be in the least affected by anything that happened after it left, so that we really see the sun not as it is, but as it was 8 minutes ago. That is to say that if anything important took place in the sun, the formation of a new sunspot, for instance an astronomer who was watching the orb through his telescope at the time would be unaware of the incident while it was happening, since the ray of light bearing the news would not reach him until more than 8 minutes later. The difference is more striking when we consider the fixed stars, because in their case the distances are so enormously greater. The pole star, for example, is so far off that light, traveling at the inconceivable speed above mentioned, takes a little more than 50 years to reach our eyes, and from that follows the strange but inevitable inference that we see the pole star not as or where it is at this moment, but as and where it was 50 years ago. Nay, if tomorrow some cosmic catastrophe were to shatter the pole star into fragments, we should still see it peacefully shining in the sky all the rest of our lives. Our children would grow up to middle age and gather their children about them in turn before the news of the tremendous accident reached any terrestrial eye. In the same way, there are other stars so far distant that light takes thousands of years to travel from them to us, and with reference to their condition our information is therefore thousands of years behind time. Now carry the argument a step farther. Suppose that we were able to place a man at the distance of 186,000 miles from the Earth, and yet to endow him with the wonderful faculty of being able from that distance to see what was happening here as clearly as though he were still close beside us. It is evident that a man so placed would see everything a second after the time it really happened, and so at the present moment he would be seeing what happened a second ago. Double that distance, and he would be 2 seconds behind time, and so on. Remove him to the distance of the sun, still allowing him to preserve the same mysterious power of sight, and he would look down and watch you doing not what you are doing now, but what you were doing 8 minutes and a quarter ago. Carry him to the pole star, and he would see passing before his eyes the events of 50 years ago. He would be watching the childish gambols of those who at the same moment were really middle-aged men. Marvelous as this may sound, it is literally and scientifically true, and cannot be denied. Flammarion, in his story, called Lumen, makes his spirit hero pass at will along the ray of light from the earth, seeing the things of different eras of Earth time. He even made him travel backward along that ray, thus seeing the happenings in reverse order, as in a moving picture running backward. This story is of the greatest interest to the occultist, for while the Akashic records are not the same as the light records, yet the analogy is so marked in many ways that the occultist sees here another exemplification of the old occult axiom that as above, so below. As below, so above. I take the liberty of quoting here from my little book, The Astral World, in order to give you some further idea of the nature of these records in the astral light. The reader is supposed to be traveling in his astral body, having the phenomena of the astral pointed out to him by a competent occultist acting as his guide. The occultist guide says to the student, changing our vibrations, we find ourselves entering a strange region, the nature of which you at first fail to discern. Pausing a moment until your astral vision becomes attuned to the peculiar vibrations of this region, you will find that you are becoming gradually aware of what may be called an immense picture gallery, spreading out in all directions, and apparently bearing a direct relation to every point of space on the surface of the earth. At first, you find it difficult to decipher the meaning of this great array of pictures. The trouble arises from the fact that they are arranged not one after the other in sequence on a flat plane but rather in sequence, one after another, in a peculiar order which may be called the order of X-ness in space, because it is neither the dimension of length, breadth, or depth. It is practically the order of the fourth dimension in space, which cannot be described in terms of ordinary spatial dimension. Again, you find upon closely examining the pictures that they are very minute, practically microscopic in size, and require the use of the peculiar magnifying power of astral vision to bring them up to a size capable of being recognized by your faculty of visual recognition. The astral vision, when developed, is capable of magnifying any object, material or astral, to an enormous degree. For instance, the trained occultist is able to perceive the whirling atoms and corpuscles of matter, by means of this peculiarity of astral vision. Likewise, he is able to plainly perceive many fine vibrations of light which are invisible to the ordinary sight. In fact, the peculiar astral light which pervades this region is due to the power of the astral vision to perceive and register these fine vibrations of light. Bring this power of magnifying into operation, and you will see that each of the little points and details of the great world picture so spread before you in the astral light is really a complete scene of a certain place on earth, at a certain period in the history of the earth. It resembles one of the small views in a series of moving pictures, a single view of a roll film. It is fixed, and not in motion, and yet we can move forward along the fourth dimension, and thus obtain a moving picture of the history of any point on the surface of the earth, or even combine the various points into a large moving picture. In the same way, let us prove this by actual experiment. Close your eyes for a moment, while we travel back in time, so to speak, along the series of these astral records, for, indeed, they travel back to the beginning of the history of the earth. Now open your eyes. Looking around you, you perceive the pictured representation of strange scenes filled with persons wearing a peculiar garb, but all is still, no life, no motion. Now, let us move forward in time, at much higher rate than that in which the astral views were registered. You now see flying before you the great movement of life on a certain point of space, in a far distant age. From birth to death you see the life of these strange people, all in the space of a few moments. Great battles are fought, and cities rise before your eyes, all in a great moving picture flying at a tremendous speed. Now stop, and then let us move backward in time. Still gazing at the moving pictures, you see a strange sight, like that of reversing the film in a moving picture. You see everything moving backward, cities crumbling into nothingness, men arising from their graves, and growing younger each second until they are finally born as babes. Everything moving backward in time, instead of forward. You can thus witness any great historical event, or follow the career of any great personage from birth to death or backward. You will notice, moreover, that everything is semi-transparent, and that accordingly you can see the picture of what is going on inside of buildings as well as outside of them. Nothing escapes the astral light records. Nothing can be concealed from it. By traveling to any point in time, on the fourth dimension, you may begin at that point, and see a moving picture of the history of any part of the earth from that time to the present, or you may reverse the sequence by traveling backward. As we have seen, you may also travel in the astral, on ordinary space dimensions, and thus see what happened simultaneously all over the earth, at any special moment of past time, if you wish. Now, I do not for a moment wish you to understand that the above experience is possible to every clairvoyant who is able to sense past time events and happenings. On the contrary, the above experience is possible only to the advanced occultist, or to the student whom he may take with him on an astral trip. In the astral body, the clairvoyant merely catches glimpses of certain phases and fields of the great astral record region or state. For that matter, the ordinary clairvoyant merely sees a reflection of the true astral light, pictures a reflection similar to that of a landscape reflected in a pond. Moreover, this reflection may be, and frequently is, disturbed as if by the ripples and waves of the pond in which the landscape is reflected. But, still, even the ordinary clairvoyant is able to secure results which are wonderful enough in all truth, and which far transcend the power of the person functioning on the physical plane alone. Past-time clairvoyance is frequently induced by means of psychometry, in which the clairvoyant is able to have the loose end to unwind the ball of time. But, still, in some cases the clairvoyant is able to get en rapport with the astral records of past time by the ordinary methods of meditation, etc. The main obstacle in the last mentioned case is the difficulty of coming in contact with the exact period of past time sought for in psychometry. The vibrations of the associated object supplies the missing link. Lacking the associated object, the clairvoyant may obtain the link by bringing into the imagination some associated scene of that time, something else that happened about the same time. All that is needed is to get hold of something associated in space or in time with the sought for scene. All that is needed is the loose end of association. Sometimes the clairvoyant senses some past time experience, the place and time of which is unknown to him. In such cases, it is necessary for him to get hold of some loose end by which he may work out the solution. For instance, the picture of a certain building or personage, or historical happening, may give the key to the mystery. In very high forms of past-time clairvoyance, the clairvoyant is able not only to perceive the actual happenings of the past, but also to actually sense the thought and feelings of the actors therein, for these, too, are recorded on the astral plane. In other cases, the clairvoyant person is able to picture scenes and happenings relating to his past incarnations, even though he is not able to sense other past-time events and scenes. But, here again, many good past-time clairvoyants are not able to catch these glimpses of their own past lives, though able to perceive those of other persons. All these variations are due to certain technical differences into which I cannot go into detail at this place. Again, some persons are able to perceive events that have happened to persons present before them, but are not able to contact past time events in the ordinary way. There are 1,001 variations in clairvoyant work. Only the highly advanced occultist is master of all of them. But, still everyone may develop himself or herself, from humble beginnings. In concluding this lesson, I wish to call your attention to the following advice from a man well advanced in the knowledge of the astral plane. He says, "It would be well for all students to bear in mind that occultism is the apotheosis of common sense, and that every vision that comes to them is not necessarily a picture from the Akashic records, nor every experience a revelation from on high. It is far better to err on the side of healthy skepticism, than of over-credulity, and it is an admirable rule never to hunt about for an occult explanation of anything when a plain and obvious physical one is available. Our duty is to endeavor to keep our balance always, and never to lose our self-control, but to take a reasonable, common-sense view of whatever may happen to us, so that we may be wiser occultists, and more useful helpers than we have ever been before." We find examples of all degrees of the power to see into this memory of nature, from the trained man who can consult the records for himself at will, down to the person who gets nothing but occasional vague glimpses, or has perhaps had only once such glimpse. But even the man who possesses this faculty only partially and occasionally still finds it of the deepest interest. The psychometer, who needs an object physically connected with the past in order to bring it all into life again around him, and the crystal gazer who can sometimes direct his less certain astral telescope to some historic scene of long ago, may both derive the greatest enjoyment from the exercise of their respective gifts, even though they may not always understand exactly how their results are obtained, and may not have them fully under control under all circumstances. In many cases of the lower manifestations of these powers we find that they are exercised unconsciously. Many a crystal gazer watches scenes from the past without being able to distinguish them from visions of the present. And many a vaguely psychic person finds pictures constantly arising before his eyes, without ever realizing that he is in effect psychometrizing the various objects around him, as he happens to touch them or stands near them. An interesting variant of this class of psychics is the man who is able to psychometrize persons only, and not inanimate objects as is more usual. In most cases this faculty shows itself erratically, so that such a psychic will, when introduced to a stranger, often see in a flash some prominent event in that stranger's earlier life, but on similar occasions will receive no special impression. More rarely we meet with someone who gets detailed visions of the past life of nearly everyone whom he encounters. It may easily happen, moreover, that a person may see a picture of the past without recognizing it as such, unless there happens to be in it something which attracts special attention, such as a figure in armor, or in antique costume. It's probable, therefore, that occasional glimpses of these astral reflections of the Akashic records are commoner than the published accounts would lead us to believe. I would say to my students, make haste slowly. Do not try to rush development too rapidly. Perfect and develop yourself in one line of psychic power, before seeking another. Take things coolly, and do not lose your head because you happen to achieve some wonderful phenomena. Do not become conceited and vainglorious. And, finally, do not prostitute your powers to ignoble ends, and make a cheap show of them. By cheapening and prostituting the higher psychic powers, the student frequently ends by losing them altogether. Moderation in all things is the safe policy, and it always is well for the occultist to resist temptation to use his powers for unworthy, sensational, or purely selfish purposes. Lesson 12. Clairvoyance of the Future. Future time clairvoyance, as indicated by its name, is that class of clairvoyant phenomena which is concerned with the perception of facts, events and happenings of future time. In this class of clairvoyant phenomena naturally fall all genuine cases of prophecy, prevision, foretelling, second sight, etc. History, theological and secular, is filled with instances of the foretelling of the future by prophets, wise men, and others. By many, such powers are generally regarded as supernatural or divine. Without wishing to combat such theories and beliefs, I would say that the advanced occultists account for all such phenomena under the general laws of clairvoyance. But while the phenomena itself is very well known, and is accepted as genuine in even many cases in which past-time clairvoyance is doubted, still it is even more difficult to explain than is past-time clairvoyance based on the Akashic records or the astral light. To the person not well versed in occult knowledge and esoteric principles, it is deemed impossible to intelligently account for the perception of an event before it has actually happened, perhaps years before its actual happening. While I cannot hope to make this matter absolutely clear to the person who is not an advanced student of occultism, still I shall try to throw at least some light on the underlying principles of this wonderful class of occult phenomena. The main point for the student to realize is that there are natural laws underlying this phenomenon, and that it is not a matter of supernatural power, or necessarily of divine special dispensation. In the first place, in some of the simpler forms of future-time clairvoyance, there is merely a higher development of subconscious reasoning from analogy. That is to say, the subconscious mental faculties of the person reason out that such and so being the case, then it follows that so and so will result, unless something entirely unexpected should prevent or intervene. This is merely an extension of certain forms of reasoning that we perform ordinarily. For instance, we see a child playing with a sharp tool, and we naturally reason that it will cut itself. We see a man acting in certain ways which generally lead to certain ends, and we naturally reason that the expected result will occur. The more experience that the observer has had, and the keener his faculty of perception and his power of deductive reasoning, the wider will be the range of his power in the direction of predicting future results from present happenings and conditions. In this connection, we must remember that the ordinary clairvoyant has easier access to his subconscious mentality than has the average person. The subconscious mind perceives and notes many little things that the conscious mind overlooks, and therefore has better data from which to reason. Moreover, as all students of the subconscious know, these wonderful subconscious mental faculties have a very highly developed power of reasoning deductively from a given premise or fact. In fact, the subconscious faculties are almost perfect reasoning machines, providing they are supplied with correct data in the first place. Much of the so-called intuitive reasoning of persons arises from the operations of the subconscious mental faculties just mentioned. But, you may say, this is very interesting, but it is not clairvoyance. Certainly, good student, but still clairvoyance plays an important part even in this elementary form of prevision and future seeing. You must remember that by clairvoyant vision the real thoughts and feelings of a person may be perceived. But, unless the attention of the clairvoyant is specially directed to this, the conscious mind does not note it, and the matter reaches the subconscious faculties without interference or conscious knowledge on the part of the clairvoyant. This being so, it will be seen that the subconscious mind of the clairvoyant is able to reason deductively, in such cases, far beyond the power of even the subconscious mind of the ordinary person. It has fuller data and more complete material to work upon. Of course, it has become a proverb of the race that coming events cast their shadows before, and many persons frequently have little flashes of future time seeing without realizing that they are really exercising elementary clairvoyant powers. The combination of even a simple form of clairvoyance and an active subconscious mind will often produce very wonderful results, although not of course the more complex phenomena of full clairvoyance and prevision. Some persons have claimed that even this form of prevision implies something like fate or predestination, but this is not fully true, for we must remember the fact that in some cases it is possible to so act in accordance with a clairvoyant warning of this kind that the impending calamity may be escaped. But, on the other hand, we must also remember that every event is the result of certain preceding events, without which it could not have happened, and which existing it must happen unless some new element intervenes. There is such a thing as cause and effect, we must remember, and if we can reason clearly from one to the other with sufficient clearness, then we may actually prophesy certain things in advance, always making allowance for the intervention of the unexpected. An authority says on this phase of the question, There is no doubt whatever that, just as what is happening now is the result of causes set in motion in the past, so what will happen in the future will be the result of causes already in operation. Even on this plane of life we can calculate that if certain actions are performed, certain results will follow, but our reckoning is constantly liable to be disturbed by the interference of factors which we have not been able to take into account. But if we raise our consciousness to the higher planes, we can see much further into the results of our actions. We can trace, for example, the effect of a casual word, not only upon the person to whom it was addressed, but through him on many others as it is passed on in widening circles, until it seems to have affected the whole country, and one glimpse of such a vision is more efficient than any number of moral precepts in impressing upon us the necessity of extreme circumspection in thought, word, and deed. Not only can we from that plane see thus fully the result of every action, but we can also see where and in what way the results of other actions apparently quite unconnected with it will interfere with and modify it. In fact, it may be said that the results of all causes at present in action are clearly visible, that the future, as it would be if no entirely new causes should arise, lies open before our gaze. New causes of course do arise, because man's will is free, but in the case of all ordinary people the use which they make of their freedom may be calculated beforehand with considerable accuracy. The average man has so little real will that he is very much the creature of circumstances. His action in previous lives places him amid certain surroundings, and their influence upon him is so very much the most important factor in his life story that his future course may be predicted with almost mathematical certainty. With the developed man the case is different. For him also the main events of life are arranged by his past actions, but the way in which he will allow them to affect him, the methods by which he will deal with them and perhaps triumph over them, these are all his own, and they cannot be foreseen even on the mental plane except as probabilities. Looking down on man's life in this way from above, it seems as though his free will could be exercised only in certain crises in his career. He arrives at a point in his life where there are obviously 2 or 3 alternative courses open before him. He is absolutely free to choose which of them he pleases, and although someone who knew his nature thoroughly well might feel almost certain what his choice would be, such knowledge on his friend's part wants in no sense a compelling force. But when he has chosen, he has to go through with it and take the consequences. Having entered upon a particular path, he may, in many cases, be forced to go on for a very long time before he has any opportunity to turn aside. His position is somewhat like that of a driver of a train. When he comes to a junction he may have the points set either this way or that, and so can pass on to whichever line he pleases. But when he has passed on to one of them he is compelled to run on along the line which he has selected until he reaches another set of points, where again an opportunity of choice is offered to him. But, interesting and wonderful as this phase of future time clairvoyance undoubtedly is, it pales before the fuller and more complete phases. And, in the latter, we must look elsewhere for the explanation or approach to an explanation. The explanation of this higher form of future time clairvoyance must be looked for in a new conception of the nature and meaning of time. It is difficult to approach this question without becoming at once involved in technical metaphysical discussion. As an example of this difficulty, I invite you to consider the following from Sir Oliver Lodge, in his address to the British Association, at Cardiff, several years ago. While what he says is very clear to the mind of a person trained along these lines of subtle thought, it will be almost like Greek to the average person. Sir Oliver Lodge said, "A luminous and helpful idea is that time is but a relative mode of regarding things. We progress through phenomena at a certain definite pace, and this subjective advance we interpret in an objective manner, as if events moved necessarily in this order and at this precise rate. But that may be only one mode of regarding them. The events may be in some sense of existence always, both past and future, and it may be we who are arriving at them, not they which are happening." The analogy of a traveler in a railway train is useful. If he could never leave the train nor alter its pace, he would probably consider the landscapes as necessarily successive and be unable to conceive their coexistence. We perceive, therefore, a possible fourth dimensional aspect about time, the inexorableness of whose flow may be a natural part of our present limitations. And if we once grasp the idea that past and future may be actually existing, we can recognize that they may have a controlling influence on all present action, and the two together may constitute the higher plane or totality of things after which, as it seems to me, we are impelled to seek, in connection with the directing of form or determinism, and the action of living being consciously directed to a definite and preconceived end. Sir Oliver's illustration is somewhat akin to that of a person who sees a moving picture show for the first time, and does not know how it is produced. To him it looks as if the events of the pictured story actually were developing and happening in time, whereas, in reality the whole picture is existing at one time. Its past, present and future is already pictured, and may be seen by one who knows the secret and how to look for the past or future scene, while, to the ordinary observer, the scene progresses in sequence, the present being followed by something else which is at this moment in the future, and therefore, unknowable. To the senses of the ordinary observer only the present is in existence, while, in fact, the future is equally truly in existence at the same time, although not evident to the senses of the observer. Think over this a little, and let the idea sink into your mind. It may help you to understand something concerning the mystery of future time, clairvoyance, prevision, or second sight. Time, you know, is far more relative than we generally conceive it. It is a scientific fact that a person in the dream state may cover years of time in a dream that occupies only a few seconds of time. Persons have nodded and awakened immediately afterwards, as proved by others present in the room, and yet in that moment's time they have dreamed of long journeys to foreign lands, great campaigns of war, etc. Moreover, a loud sound, a pistol shot, for instance, which has awakened a sleeping person, has also set into effect a dream state train of circumstances, constituting a long dream state story which, after many events and happenings, terminated in the shot of a firing squad, and then the man awoke. Now in this last mentioned case, not only has the dreamer experienced events covering a long time, all in the space of a second of time, but, also, the very sound which terminated the dream also induced it from the very beginning. The last thing caused the first things to appear and proceed in sequence to the last. Persons under the influence of chloroform, or laughing gas, have similar experiences. Often the first sound heard at the moment of recovering consciousness seems to be the last thing in a long dream which preceded it, though the long dream was really caused by the final sound. Now, remember, that here not only did past, present and future exist at the same moment of time, but, also, the future caused the past and present to come into being. On the physical plane, we have analogies illustrating this fact. It is said that in every acorn rests and exists, in miniature, the form of the future oak. And, some go so far as to say that the oak is the ultimate cause of the acorn, that the idea of the oak caused the acorn to be at all. In the same way, the idea of the man must be in the infant boy, from the moment of birth, and even from the moment of conception. But, let us pass on to the bold conception of the most advanced metaphysicians. They have a still more dazzling explanation. Let us listen to it. These occultists and metaphysicians, who have thought long and deeply upon the ultimate facts and nature of the universe, have dared to think that there must exist some absolute consciousness, some absolute mind which must perceive the past, present and future of the universe as one happening as simultaneously and actively present at one moment of absolute time. They reason that just as man may see as one happening of a moment of his time some particular event which might appear as a year to some minute form of life and mind, the microscopic creatures in a drop of water, for instance, so that which seems as a year, or 100 years, to the mind of man may appear as the happening of a single moment of a higher scale of time to some exalted being or form of consciousness on a higher plane. You remember that it is said that 1,000 years is but as a day to the Lord, and the Hindu Vedas tell us that the creation, duration, and destruction of the universe is as but the time of the twinkling of an eye to Brahman. I shall not proceed further along this line. I have given you a very strong hint here. You must work it out for yourself, if you feel so disposed. But there are certain consequences arising from this ultimate universal fact, which I must mention before passing on. The higher occult teachings hold that there is a plane of the higher astral world which may be said to carry a reflection of the universal mind, just as a lake contains a reflection of the distant mountain. Well, then, the clairvoyant vision at times is able to penetrate to the realm of that astral reflecting medium, and see somewhat dimly what is pictured there. As the future may be discerned in this reflected picture, by the clairvoyant mind, we see how future seeing, prevision, and second sight may be explained scientifically. A writer has said, on this plane, in some manner which down here is totally inexplicable, the past, the present, and the future, are all there existing simultaneously. One can only accept this fact, for its cause lies in the faculty of that exalted plane, and the way in which this higher faculty works is naturally quite incomprehensible to the physical brain. Yet now and then one may meet with a hint that seems to bring us a trifle nearer to an impossibility of comprehension. When the pupil's consciousness is fully developed upon this higher plane, therefore, perfect prevision is possible to him, though he may not, nay, he certainly will not be able to bring the whole result of his sight through fully and in order into his physical consciousness. Still, a great deal of clear foresight is obviously within his power whenever he likes to exercise it, and even when he is not exercising it, frequent flashes of foreknowledge come through into his ordinary life, so that he often has an instantaneous intuition as to how things will turn out. The same writer says, short of perfect prevision we find that all degrees of this type of clairvoyance exist, from the occasional vague premonitions which cannot in any true sense be called sight at all, up to frequent and fairly complete second sight. The faculty to which this latter somewhat misleading name has been given is an extremely interesting one, and would well repay more careful and systematic study than has hitherto been given to it. It is best known to us as a not infrequent possession of the Scottish Highlanders, though it is by no means confined to them. Occasional instances of it have appeared in almost every nation, but it has always been commonest among mountaineers and men of lonely life. With us in England it is often spoken of as if it were the exclusive appanage of the Celtic race, but in reality it has appeared among similarly situated peoples the world over. It is stated, for example, to be very common among the Westphalian peasantry. Sometimes the second sight consists of a picture clearly foreshowing some coming event. More frequently, perhaps, the glimpse of the future is given in some symbolical appearance. It is noteworthy that the events foreseen are invariably unpleasant ones, death being the commonest of all. I do not recollect a single instance in which the second sight has shown anything which was not of the most gloomy nature. It has a ghastly symbolism of its own, a symbolism of shrouds and corpse candles, and other funeral horrors. In some cases it appears to be to a certain extent dependent upon locality, for it is stated that inhabitants of the Isle of Skye who possess the faculty often lose it when they leave the island, even though it be only to cross to the mainland. The gift of such sight is sometimes hereditary in a family for generations, but this is not an invariable rule, for it often appears sporadically in one member of a family otherwise free from its lugubrious influence. There may be still some people who deny the possibility of prevision, but such denial simply shows their ignorance of the evidence on the subject. The large number of authenticated cases leave no room for doubt as to the fact, but many of them are of such a nature as to render a reasonable explanation by no means easy to find. It is evident that the ego possesses a certain amount of previsional faculty, and if the events foreseen were always of great importance, one might suppose that an extraordinary stimulus had enabled him for that occasion only to make a clear impression of what he saw upon his lower personality. No doubt that is the explanation of many of the cases in which death or grave disaster is foreseen, but there are a large number of instances on record to which it does not seem to apply, since the events foretold are frequently trivial and unimportant. In the following I shall present to your consideration some very remarkable cases of future time clairvoyance, prevision, or second sight. Some of these are historical cases, and all are vouched for by the best authorities. I quote these cases not merely for their own interesting features, but also to give you an idea of how remarkable some of these instances are, and also to give you a clear conception of the way in which this form of clairvoyance tends to manifest itself. Before passing on to these interesting cases, however, I wish to remind you that in future time clairvoyance, as well as in past time clairvoyance, the phenomenon may be manifested in many ways and according to several methods. That is to say, that in future time clairvoyance the vision may come in the state of meditation, or it may come along the lines of psychometry, some associated object or person supplying the connecting link, or, again, it may come as the result of crystal gazing, etc. This is as we might naturally expect, for this form of clairvoyance is merely one special and particular phase of clairvoyance in general, and of course, comes under the general laws and rules governing all clairvoyant phenomena. Future time clairvoyance, prevision and second sight may, like any other form of clairvoyance, be developed and unfolded, by means of the same rules and methods that I have already suggested to you in the preceding lessons. It is all a matter of attention, application, patience, exercise and practice. I may say, however, that the strong desire and wish for the perception of future events, held firmly in mind during the practicing and exercising, will tend to unfold and develop the clairvoyant faculties in this particular direction. Strong desire, and earnest attention in the desired direction, will do much to cultivate, develop and unfold any psychic faculty. Just as meditation and reverie about past times and things tend to develop past time clairvoyance, so will meditation and reverie about future time and things tend to develop prevision and the seeing of future things. This, indeed, is the very first step toward the attainment of this form of clairvoyance. The attention clears the psychic path, over which the astral faculties travel. In the astral, as on the physical, the rule is, always look where you are going, look ahead on the path over which you wish to travel. Lesson 13. Second sight, prevision, etc. Notwithstanding the difficulties in the way of an intelligent explanation of the phenomena of future time clairvoyance, second sight, prevision, etc., of which I have spoken in the preceding lesson, the human race has always had a lively reminder of the existence of such phenomena, and the records of the race have always contained many instances of the manifestation thereof. Among all peoples, in all lands, in all times, there have been noted remarkable instances of the power of certain persons to peer into, and correctly report from, the mysterious regions of the future. Passing from the traditional reports of the race, and the minor instances known to almost every person, we find that the scientific investigators of psychic phenomena have gathered together an enormous array of well-authenticated cases of this class. The reports of the Society for Psychical Research contain hundreds of such cases, which the student may read and study with interest and profit. It is not my intention to present a full history of the reports of this character. Rather, I shall call your attention to a few striking cases, in order to illustrate the phenomenon clearly and forcibly. There is such a wealth of material of this kind that it embarrasses one who wishes to select from it. However, I shall do the best I can in that direction. Following, to commence with, I give you extracts from a well-known case reported by a prominent member of the Theosophical Society, which has attracted much attention. It was related to this person by one of the actors in the scene. It happened in India. A party of English army officers was entering a dense jungle. Then follows the story, as below. We plunged into the jungle, and had walked on for about an hour without much success, when Cameron, who happened to be next to me, stopped suddenly, turned pale as death, and, pointing straight before him, cried in accents of horror, "See! See! Merciful heavens, look there!" "Where? What? What is it?" we all shouted confusedly, as we rushed up to him, and looked around in expectation of encountering a tiger or a cobra, we hardly knew what, but assuredly something terrible, since it had been sufficient to cause such evident emotion in our usually self-contained comrade. But neither tiger nor cobra was visible, nothing but Cameron pointing with ghastly haggard face and starting eyeballs at something we could not see. "Cameron, Cameron!" cried I, seizing his arm, "for heaven's sake speak. What is the matter?" Scarcely were the words out of my mouth when a low but very peculiar sound struck upon my ear, and Cameron, dropping his pointing hand, said in a hoarse, strained voice, "There. You heard it. Thank God it's over." and fell to the ground insensible. There was a momentary confusion while we unfastened his collar, and I dashed in his face some water which I fortunately had in my flask, while another tried to pour brandy between his clenched teeth, and under cover of it I whispered to the man next to me, one of our greatest skeptics, "By the way, Beecham, did you hear anything?" "Why, yes," he replied, "a curious sound, a sort of crash or rattle far away in the distance, yet very distinct. If the thing were not utterly impossible, I could have sworn that it was the rattle of musketry." "Just my impression," murmured I, "but hush. He is recovering." In a minute or two he was able to speak feebly, and began to thank us and apologize for giving trouble, and soon he sat up, leaning against a tree, and in a firm, though low voice said, "My dear friends, I feel that I owe you an explanation of my extraordinary behavior. It is an explanation that I would fain avoid giving, but it must come some time, and so may as well be given now. You may perhaps have noticed that when during our voyage you all joined in scoffing at dreams, portents and visions, I invariably avoided giving any opinion on the subject. I did so because, while I had no desire to court ridicule or provoke discussion, I was unable to agree with you, knowing only too well from my own dread experience that the world which men agree to call that of the supernatural is just as real as, nay, perhaps even more real than this world we see about us. In other words, I, like many of my countrymen, am cursed with the gift of second sight, that awful faculty which foretells in vision calamities that are shortly to occur. Such a vision I had just now, and its exceptional horror moved me as you have seen. I saw before me a corpse, not that of one who has died a peaceful, natural death, but that of the victim of some terrible accident, a ghastly, shapeless mass, with a face swollen, crushed, unrecognizable. I saw this dreadful object placed in a coffin, and the funeral service performed over it. I saw the burial ground, I saw the clergyman, and though I had never seen either before, I can picture both perfectly in my mind's eye now. I saw you, myself, Beecham, all of us and many more, standing round as mourners. I saw the soldiers raise their muskets after the service was over. I heard the volley they fired, and then I knew no more. As he spoke of that volley of musketry I glanced across with a shudder at Beecham, and the look of stony horror on that handsome skeptic's face was not to be forgotten. Omitting the somewhat long recital of events which followed, I would say that later in the same day the party of young officers and soldiers discovered the body of their commanding officer in the shocking condition so vividly and graphically described by young Cameron. The story proceeds as follows. When, on the following evening, we arrived at our destination, and our melancholy deposition had been taken down by the proper authorities, Cameron and I went out for a quiet walk, to endeavor with the assistance of the soothing influence of nature to shake off something of the gloom which paralyzed our spirits. Suddenly he clutched my arm, and, pointing through some rude railings, said in a trembling voice, "Yes, there it is. That is the burial ground of yesterday." And, when later on we were introduced to the chaplain of the post, I noticed, though my friends did not, the irrepressible shudder with which Cameron took his hand, and I knew that he had recognized the clergyman of his vision. The story concludes with the statement that in all the little details, as well as the main points, the scene at the burial of the commanding officer corresponded exactly with the vision of Cameron. This story brings out the fact that the Scotch people are especially given to manifestations of second sight, particularly the Highlanders or mountain people of that land. It is hard to find a Scotchman, who, in his heart, does not believe in second sight, and who has not known of some well-authenticated instance of its manifestation. In other lands, certain races, or sub-races, seem to be specially favored, or cursed, as Cameron asserted, with this power. It will be noticed, usually, that such people dwell, or have dwelt in the highlands or mountains of their country. There seems to be something in the mountains and hills which tends to develop and encourage this power in those dwelling among them. The story is also remarkable in the fact that the impression was so strong in the mind of Cameron that it actually communicated itself by clairaudience to those near to him. This is quite unusual, though not without correspondence in other cases. Otherwise, the case is merely a typical one. and may be duplicated in the experience of thousands of other men and women. George Fox, the pioneer Quaker, had this faculty well developed, and numerous instances of its manifestation by him are recorded. For instance, he foretold the death of Cromwell. When he met him riding at Hampton Court, he said that he felt a waft of death around and about Cromwell, and Cromwell died shortly afterwards. Fox also publicly foretold the dissolution of the Rump Parliament of England, the restoration of Charles II, and the Great Fire of London. These are historical facts. Remember, for that matter, history contains many instances of this kind. The prophecy of Caesar's death, and its further prevision by his wife, for instance. The Bible prophecies and predictions, major and minor, give us semi-historical instances. A celebrated historical instance of remarkable second sight and prevision is that of Cazot, whose wonderful prediction and its literal fulfillment are matters of French history. Dumas has woven the fact into one of his stories, in a dramatic manner, but even so he does not make the tale any more wonderful than the bare facts. Here is the recital of the case by Laha, the French writer, who was a personal witness of the occurrence, and whose testimony was corroborated by many others who were present at the time. La Harpe says, "It appears as but yesterday, and yet, nevertheless, it was at the beginning of the year 1788. We were dining with one of our brethren at the Academy, a man of considerable wealth and genius. The conversation became serious. Much admiration was expressed on the revolution in thought which Voltaire had effected, and it was agreed that it was his first claim to the reputation he enjoyed. We concluded that the revolution must soon be consummated, that it was indispensable that superstition and fanaticism should give way to philosophy, and we began to calculate the probability of the period when this should be, and which of the present company should live to see it. The oldest complained that they could scarcely flatter themselves with the hope. The younger rejoiced that they might entertain this very probable expectation, and they congratulated the Academy especially for having prepared this great work, and for having been the rallying point, the centre, and the prime mover of the liberty of thought. One only of the guests had not taken part in all the joyousness of this conversation, and had even gently and cheerfully checked our splendid enthusiasm. This was Cazot, an amiable and original man, but unhappily infatuated with the reveries of the Illuminati. He spoke, and with the most serious tone, saying, "Gentlemen, be satisfied. You will all see this great and sublime revolution, which you so much desire. You know that I am a little inclined to prophesy. I repeat, you will see it." He was answered by the common rejoinder, "One need not be a conjurer to see that." He answered, "Be it so, but perhaps one must be a little more than conjurer, for what remains for me to tell you. Do you know what will be the consequences of this revolution? What will be the consequence to all of you, and what will be the immediate result? The well-established effect, the thoroughly recognized consequences to all of you who are here present are," said Condorcet, with his insolent and half-suppressed smile. "Let us hear. A philosopher is not sorry to encounter a prophet. Let us hear." Cazot replied, "You, Monsieur de Condorcet, you will yield up your last breath on the floor of a dungeon. You will die from poison, which you will have taken in order to escape from execution, from poison which the happiness of that time will oblige you to carry about your person. You, Monsieur de Champfort, you will open your veins with 22 cuts of a razor, and yet will not die till some months afterward." These personages looked at each other, and laughed again. Cazot continued, "You, Monsieur Vic d'Azyr, you will not open your own veins, but you will cause yourself to be bled 6 times in one day, during a paroxysm of the gout, in order to make more sure of your end, and you will die in the night." Cazot went on, "You, Monsieur de Nolay, you will die on the scaffold. You, Monsieur Bailey, on the scaffold. You, Monsieur de Malesherbes, on the scaffold." "Ah, God be thanked," exclaimed Rouache, "and what have I?" Cazot replied, "You? You also will die on the scaffold." "Yes," replied Champfort, "but when will all this happen?" Cazot answered, 6 years will not pass over, before all that I have said to you shall be accomplished." Here I, La Harpe, spoke, saying, "Here are some astonishing miracles, but you have not included me in your list." Cazot answered me, saying, "But you will be there, As an equally extraordinary miracle you will then be a Christian. Vehement exclamations on all sides followed this startling assertion. "Ah!" said Champfort, "I am comforted if we shall perish only when La Harpe shall be a Christian. We are immortal then," observed Madame la Duchesse de Gramont. "As for that, we women, we are happy to be counted for nothing in these revolutions. When I say for nothing, it is not that we do not always mix ourselves up with them a little, but it is a received maxim that they take no notice of us, and of our sex." "Your sex, ladies," said Cazotte, "your sex will not protect you this time, and you had far better meddle with nothing, for you will be treated entirely as men, without any difference whatever." "But what, then, are you really telling us of, Monsieur Cazotte?" "You are preaching to us the end of the world." "I know nothing on that subject, but what I do know is, that you, Madame la Duchesse, will be conducted to the scaffold, you and many other ladies with you, in the cart of the executioner, and with your hands tied behind your backs." "Ah, I hope that in that case, I shall at least have a carriage hung in black." "No, Madame, higher ladies than yourself will go, like you, in the common car, with their hands tied behind them." "Higher ladies? What? The princesses of the blood?" "Yea, and still more exalted personages," replied Cazotte. Here a sensible emotion pervaded the whole company, and the countenance of the host was dark and lowering. They began to feel that the joke was becoming too serious. Madame de Gramont, in order to dissipate the cloud, took no notice of the reply, and contented herself with saying in a careless tone, "You see, that he will not leave me even a confessor." "No, madam," replied Cazotte, "you will not have one, neither you, nor anyone besides. The last victim to whom this favor will be afforded will be—" Here he stopped for a moment. "Well, who then will be the happy mortal to whom this prerogative will be given?" Cazotte replied, "It is the only one which he will have then retained, and that will be the King of France." This last startling prediction caused the company to disband in something like terror and dismay, for the mere mention of such thing was akin to treason. The amazing sequel to this strange story is that within the 6 years allotted by the prophecy, every detail thereof was verified absolutely. The facts are known to all students of the French Revolution, and may be verified by reference to any history of that terrible period. To appreciate the startling nature of the prophecy when made, one needs but to be acquainted with the position and characteristics of the persons whose destinies were foretold. This celebrated instance of highly advanced future time clairvoyance, or prevision, has never been equalled. The reason, perhaps, is that Cazotte indeed was an advanced and highly developed occultist. The account mentions this. You will notice this class of persons very seldom prophesy in this way, for reasons known to all occultists. The ordinary cases recorded are those in which the manifestation is that of a person of lesser powers and less perfect development. Advanced occultists know the danger of a careless use of this power. They know that, omitting other and very important reasons, such revelations would work a terrible effect upon the minds of persons not sufficiently well balanced to stand the disclosure. Moreover, they know that if the average person knew the principal details of his future life on earth, then he would lose interest in it. It would become stale and would lose the attraction of the unknown. In such a case, the pleasant things to come would lose their attractiveness by reason of having been dwelt on so long that their flavor was lost, and the unpleasant things would become unbearable by reason of the continual anticipation of them. We are apt to discount our pleasures by dwelling too much upon them in anticipation, and, as we all know, the dread of a coming evil often is worse than the thing itself. We suffer 1,000 pangs in anticipation to one in reality. But, as I have intimated, there are other, and still more serious reasons why the advanced occultists do not indulge in public prophecies of this kind. It is probable that Cazotte decided to, and was permitted to, make his celebrated prophecy for some important occult reason of which La Harpe had no knowledge. It doubtless was a part of the working out of some great plan, and it may have accomplished results undreamed of by us. At any rate, it was something very much out of the ordinary, even in the case of advanced occultists and masters of esoteric knowledge. Another case which has a historic value is the well-known case concerning the assassination of Spencer Perceval, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in England, which occurred in the lobby of the House of Commons. The persons who have a knowledge of the case report that some 9 days before the tragic occurrence a Cornish mine manager, named John Williams, had a vision, 3 times in succession, in which he saw a small man, dressed in a blue coat and white waistcoat, entered the lobby of the House of Commons, whereupon another man, dressed in a snuff-coloured coat, stepped forward, and, drawing a pistol from an inside pocket, fired at and shot the small man, the bullet lodging in the left breast. In the vision, Williams turned and asked some bystander the name of the victim. The bystander replied that the stricken man was Mr. Spencer Perceval, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. The valuable feature of the case, from a scientific standpoint, lies in the fact that Williams was very much impressed by his thrice-repeated vision, and was greatly disturbed thereby. His anxiety was so great that he spoke of the matter to several friends, and asked them whether it would not be well for him to go to London for the purpose of warning Mr. Perceval. His friends ridiculed the whole matter, and persuaded him to give up the idea of visiting London for the purpose named. Those who had a knowledge of the vision were greatly startled and shocked when several days afterward the assassination occurred, agreeing in perfect detail with the vision of the Cornishman. The case, vouched for as it was by a number of reliable persons who had been consulted by Williams, attracted much attention at the time, and has since passed into the history of remarkable instances of prevision. In some cases, however, the prevision seems to come as a warning, and in many cases the heeding of the warning has prevented the unpleasant features from materializing as seen in the vision. Up to the point of the action upon the warning the occurrence agree perfectly with the vision, but the moment the warned person acts so as to prevent the occurrence, the whole train of circumstances is broken. There is an occult explanation of this, but it is too technical to mention at this place. What is known to psychic researchers as the Hannah Green case is of this character. This story, briefly, is that Hannah Green, a housekeeper of Oxfordshire, dreamt that she, having been left alone in the house of a Sunday evening, heard a knock at the door. Opening the door she found a tramp who tried to force his way into the house. She struggled to prevent his entrance, but he struck her with a bludgeon and rendered her insensible, whereupon he entered the house and robbed it. She related the vision to her friends, but, as nothing happened for some time, the matter almost passed from her mind. But, some 7 years afterward, she was left in charge of the house on a certain Sunday evening. During the evening she was startled by a sudden knock at the door, and her former vision was recalled to her memory quite vividly. She refused to go to the door, remembering the warning, but instead went up to a landing on the stair and looked out the window. She saw at the door the very tramp whom she had seen in the vision some 7 years before, armed with a bludgeon and striving to force an entrance into the house. She took steps to frighten away the rascal, and she was saved from the unpleasant conclusion of her vision. Many similar cases are recorded. In some cases persons have been warned by symbols of various kinds or else have had prevision in the same way. For instance, many cases are known in which the vision is that of the undertaker's wagon standing before the door of the person who dies some time afterward, or, the person is visioned clad in a shroud. The variations of this class are innumerable. Speak to the average dweller in the Highlands of Scotland, or certain counties in Ireland, regarding this you will be furnished with a wealth of illustrations and examples. This phase of the general subject of clairvoyance is very fascinating to the student and investigator, and is one in which the highest psychic or astral powers of sensing are called into play. In fact, as I have said, there is here a reflection of something very much higher than the astral or psychic planes of being. The student catches a glimpse of regions infinitely higher and grander. He begins to realize at least something of the existence of that universal consciousness in which we live, and move, and have our being, and of the reality of the eternal now, in which past, present and future are blended as one fact of infinite consciousness. He sees the signboard pointing to marvelous truths. Lesson 14. Astral body traveling. There is much confusion existing in the minds of the average students of occultism concerning the distinction between astral visioning by means of the astral senses and clairvoyance, and the visioning of the astral senses during the travels of the astral body away from the physical body. There is such a close connection between the two several phases of occult phenomena that it is easy to mistake one for the other. In fact, there is often such a blending of the two that it is quite difficult to distinguish between them. However, in this lesson one shall endeavor to bring out the characteristics of astral body visioning, that the student may learn to distinguish them from those of the ordinary clairvoyant astral visioning, and recognize them when he experiences them. The main points of distinction are these: when visioning clairvoyantly by means of the astral senses, as described in the preceding chapters of this book, the clairvoyant usually perceives the scene, person or event as a picture on a flat surface. It is true that there is generally a perfect perspective, similar to that of a good stereoscopic view, or that of a high-grade moving picture photograph. The figures stand out, and do not appear flat as in the case of an ordinary photograph, but still at the best it is like looking at a moving picture, inasmuch as the whole scene is all in front of you. Visioning in the astral body, on the contrary, gives you an all-around view of the scene. That is to say, in such case you see the thing just as you would were you there in your physical body. You see in front of you, on the sides of you, out of the corner of your eye. If you turn your head, you may see in any direction, and you may turn around and see what is happening behind you. In the first case you are merely gazing at an astral picture in front of you, while in the second place you are actually there in person. There are some limitations to this seeing all around when in the astral body, however, which I should note in passing. For instance, if when in the astral body you examine the Akashic records of the past, or else peer into the scenes of the future, you will see these things merely as a picture, and will not be conscious of being present personally in the scene. An apparent exception is to be noted here, also, viz., if your past-time visioning includes the perception of yourself in a former incarnation, you may be conscious of living and acting in your former personality again. If you are psychometrizing from fossil remains, or anything concerned with a living creature of the past, you may take on the mental or emotional conditions of that creature, and seem to sense things from the inside, rather than from the outside. This, of course, is also a characteristic of the ordinary clairvoyant vision of the past, but when, in the astral body, you perceive a present-time scene in space, you are, to all intents and purposes, an actual participant. You are actually present at the place and time. The sense of being actually present in the body is the leading characteristic of the astral body visioning, and distinguishes it from the picture-seeing sensing of ordinary clairvoyance. This is stating the matter is as plain and simple form as is possible, ignoring many technical details and particulars. You, being a student of occultism, of course know that the astral body is a fine counterpart of the physical body, composed of a far more subtle form of substance than is the latter, that under certain conditions you may travel in your astral body, detached from your physical body, except being connected with it with a slender astral cord, bearing a close resemblance to the umbilical cord which connects the newborn babe with the placenta in the womb of its mother, and explore the realms of the astral plane. This projection of the astral body, as a rule, occurs only when the physical body is stilled in sleep, or in trance condition. In fact, the astral body frequently is projected by us during the course of our ordinary sleep, but we fail to remember what we have seen in our astral journeys, except, occasionally, dim flashes of partial recollection upon awakening. In some cases, however, our astral visioning is so distinct and vivid, that we awaken with a sense of having had a peculiar experience, and as having actually been out of the physical body at the time. In some cases, the person traveling in the astral is able to actually take part in the distant scene, and may, under certain circumstances, actually materialize himself so as to be seen by persons in their physical bodies. I am speaking now, of course, of the untrained person. The trained and developed occultist, of course, is able to do these things deliberately and consciously, instead of unconsciously and without intention as in the case of the ordinary person. I shall quote here from another writer on the subject, whose point of view, in connection with my own, may serve to bring about a clear understanding in the mind of the student. It is always well to view any subject from as many angles as possible. This writer says, "We enter here upon an entirely new variety of clairvoyance, in which the consciousness of the seer no longer remains in or closely connected with his physical body, but is definitely transferred to the scene which he is examining. Though it has no doubt greater dangers for the untrained seer than either of the other methods, it is yet quite the most satisfactory form of clairvoyance open to him. In this case, the man's body is either asleep or in a trance, and its organs are consequently not available for use while the vision is going on, so that all description of what is seen, and all questioning as to further particulars, must be postponed until the wanderer returns to this plane. On the other hand, the sight is much fuller and more perfect. The man hears as well as sees everything which passes before him, and can move about freely at will within the very wide limits of the astral plane. He has also the immense advantage of being able to take part, as it were, in the scenes which come before his eyes, of conversing at will with various entities on the astral plane, and from whom so much information that is curious and interesting may be obtained. If in addition he can learn how to materialize himself, a matter of no great difficulty for him when once the knack is acquired, he will be able to take part in physical events or conversations at a distance, and to show himself to an absent friend at will. Again, he will have the additional power of being able to hunt about for what he wants. By means of the other varieties of clairvoyance, for all practical purposes he may find a person or place only when he is already acquainted with it, or when he is put en rapport with it by touching something physically connected with it, as in psychometry. By the use of the astral body, however, a man can move about quite freely and rapidly in any direction, and can, for example, find without difficulty any place pointed out upon a map, without either any previous knowledge of the spot or any object to establish a connection with it. He can also readily rise high into the air so as to gain a bird's eye view of the country which he is examining, so as to observe its extent, the contour of its coastline, or its general character. Indeed, in every way his power and freedom are far greater when he uses this method than they are in any of the lesser forms of clairvoyance. In many well-authenticated cases, we may see that the soul of a dying person, one whose physical end is approaching, visits friends and relatives in the astral body, and in many cases materializes and even speaks to them. In such cases the dying person accomplishes the feat of astral manifestation without any special occult knowledge. The weakened links between the physical and the higher phases of the soul render the temporary passing out comparatively easy, and the strong desire of the dying person furnishes the motive power necessary. Such visits, however, are often found to be merely the strongly charged thought of the dying person, along the lines of telepathy, as I have previously explained to you. But in many cases there can be no doubt that the phenomenon is a clear case of astral visitation and materialization. The records of the Society for Psychical Research contain many instances of this kind, and similar instances are to be found in other records of psychical research. I shall quote a few of these cases for you, that you may get a clear idea of the characteristics thereof. Andrew Lang, an eminent student and investigator along the lines of the psychic and occult, gives us the following case, of which he says, "Not many stories have such good evidence in their favor." The story as related by Mr. Lang in one of his books is as follows. Mary, the wife of John Goff of Rochester, being afflicted with a long illness, removed to her father's house at West Mailing, about 9 miles from her own. The day before her death she grew very impatiently desirous to see her 2 children, whom she had left at home to the care of a nurse. She was too ill to be moved, and between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning she fell into a trance. One widow, Turner, who watched with her that night, says that her eyes were open and fixed, and her jaw fallen. Mrs. Turner put her hand to her mouth, but could perceive no breath. She thought her to be in a fit, and doubted whether she were dead or alive. The next morning the dying woman told her mother that she had been at home with her children, saying, "I was with them last night when I was asleep." The nurse at Rochester, Widow Alexander by name, affirms that a little before 2 o'clock that morning she saw the likeness of the said Mary Goff come out of the next chamber, where the elder child lay in a bed by itself, the door being left open, and stood by her bedside for about a quarter of an hour. The younger child was lying by her. Her eyes moved and her mouth went, but she said nothing. The nurse, moreover says that she was perfectly awake. It was then daylight, being one of the longest days of the year. She sat up in bed and looked steadfastly on the apparition. In that time she heard the bridge clock strike 2, and a while after said, "In the name of the Father, Son and Holy Ghost, what art thou?" Thereupon the apparition removed and went away. She slipped out of her clothes and followed, but what became known she cannot tell. In the case just mentioned, Mr. Lang states that the nurse was so frightened that she was afraid to return to bed. As soon as the neighbors were up and about, she told them of what she had seen, but they told her that she had been dreaming. It was only when, later on, news came of what had happened at the other end of the line, the bedside of the dying woman, that they realized just what had happened. In a work by Reverend F.G. Lee, there are several other cases of this kind quoted, all of which are stated by Mr. Lee to be thoroughly well authenticated. In one of the cases, a mother, when dying in Egypt, appears to her children in Turkey, and is clearly seen in broad daylight by all 5 children and also by the nursemaid. In another, a Quaker lady dying at Cockermouth is clearly seen and recognized in daylight by her 3 children at Seattle, the remainder of the story being almost identical with that of the Goff case just quoted. In the records of the Society for Psychical Research, the following case appears, the person reporting it being said to be of good character and reputation for truthfulness and reliability. The story is as follows. One morning in December, 1836, A. had the following dream, or he would prefer to call it, revelation. He found himself suddenly at the gate of Major N. M's Avenue, many miles from his home. Close to him was a group of persons, one of whom was a woman with a basket on her arm. The rest were men, 4 of whom were tenants of his own, while the others were unknown to him. Some of the strangers seemed to be assaulting H.W., one of his tenants, and he interfered. A. says, I struck violently at the man on my left, and then with greater violence at the man's face on my right. Finding, to my surprise, that I had not knocked down either, I struck again and again with all the violence of a man frenzied at the sight of my poor friend's murder. To my great amazement I saw my arms, although visible to my eye, were without substance, and the bodies of the men I struck at and my own came close together after each blow. Through the shadowy arms I struck with, my blows were delivered with more extreme violence than I ever think I exerted, but I became painfully convinced of my incompetency. I have no consciousness of what happened after this feeling of unsubstantiality came upon me. Next morning, A. experienced the stiffness and soreness of violent bodily exercise, and was informed by his wife that in the course of the night he had much alarmed her by striking out again and again in a terrific manner, as if fighting for his life. He, in turn, informed her of his dream, and begged her to remember the names of those actors in it who were known to him. On the morning of the following day, Wednesday, A. received a letter from his agent, who resided in the town close to the scene of the dream, informing him that his tenant had been found on Tuesday morning at Major N. M's gate, speechless and apparently dying from a fracture of the skull, and that there was no trace of the murderers. That night A. started for the town, and arrived there on Thursday morning. On his way to a meeting of magistrates, he met the senior magistrate of that part of the country, and requested him to give orders for the arrest of the 3 men whom, besides H.W., he had recognized in his dream, and to have them examined separately. This was at once done. The 3 men gave identical accounts of the occurrence, and all named the woman who was with them. She was then arrested and gave precisely similar testimony. They said that between 11 and 12 on the Monday night they had been walking homewards all together along the road, when they were overtaken by 3 strangers, 2 of whom savagely assaulted H.W., while the other prevented his friends from interfering. H.W. did not die, but was never the same man afterwards. He subsequently emigrated. Stead, the English editor and psychical researcher, relates the following case, which he accepts as truthful and correct, after careful investigation of the circumstances and of the character and reputation of the person relating it. The story proceeds as follows. Street Eglos is situated about 10 miles from the Atlantic, and not quite so far from the old market town of Trebodwina. Hart and George Northey were brothers, and from childhood their lives had been marked by the strongest brotherly affection. Hart and George Northey had never been separated from their birth until George became a sailor, Hart meantime joining his father in business. On the 8th of February, 1840, while George Northey's ship was lying in port at Street Helena, he had the following strange dream: "Last night I dreamt that my brother was at Trebodwina market, and that I was with him, quite close by his side, during the whole of the market transactions. Although I could see and hear which passed around me, I felt sure that it was not my bodily presence which thus accompanied him, but my shadow, or rather my spiritual presence, for he seemed quite unconscious that I was near him. I felt that my being thus present in this strange way betokened some hidden danger which he was destined to meet, and which I know my presence could not avert, for I could not speak to warn him of his peril." The story then proceeds to relate how Hart collected considerable money at Trebodwina market, and then started to ride homeward. George tells what happened to his brother on the way, as follows: "My terror gradually increased as Hart approached the hamlet of Polkarau, until I was in a perfect frenzy, frantically desirous, yet unable to warn my brother in some way and prevent him from going further. I suddenly became aware of two dark shadows thrown across the road. I felt that my brother's hour had come, and I was powerless to aid him. Two men appeared, whom I instantly recognized as notorious poachers who lived in a lonely wood near Street Eglows. They wished him good night, Mr. Civilly enough, he replied, and entered into conversation with them about some work he had promised them. After a few minutes they asked him for some money. The elder of the two brothers, who was standing near the horse's head, said, 'Mr. Northey, we know you have just come from Trebodwina market with plenty of money in your pockets. We are desperate men, and you bean't going to leave this place until we've got that money, so hand over.' My brother made no reply except to slash at him with the whip, and spur the horse at him. The younger of the ruffians instantly drew a pistol, and fired. Hart dropped lifeless from the saddle, and one of the villains held him by the throat with a grip of iron for some minutes, as thought to make assurance doubly sure, and crush out any particle of life my poor brother might have left. The murderers secured the horse to a tree in the orchard, and, having rifled the corpse, they dragged it up the stream, concealing it under the overhanging banks of the watercourse. Then they carefully covered over all marks of blood on the road, and hid the pistol in the thatch of a disused hut close to the roadside. Then, setting the horse free to gallop home alone, they decamped across the country to their own cottage. The story then relates how George Northey's vessel left Street Helena the next day after the dream, and reached Plymouth in due time. George carried with him a very vivid recollection of his vision on the return voyage, and never doubted for an instant that his brother had been actually murdered in the manner and by the persons named, as seen in the vision. He carried with him the determination to bring the villains to justice, and was filled with the conviction that through his efforts retribution would fall upon the murderers. In England, justice was at work, but the missing link was needed. The crime aroused universal horror and indignation, and the authorities left nothing undone in the direction of discovering the murderers and bringing them to justice. Two brothers named Hightwood were suspected, and in their cottage were found blood-stained garments. But no pistol was found, although the younger brother admitted having owned but lost one. They were arrested and brought before the magistrates. The evidence against them was purely circumstantial, and not any too strong at that, but their actions were those of guilty men. They were committed for trial. Each confessed, in hopes of saving his life and obtaining imprisonment instead. But both were convicted and sentenced to be hanged. There was doubt in the minds of some, however, about the pistol. The story continues. Before the execution, George Northey arrived from Street Helena, and declared that the pistol was in the thatch of the old cottage close by the place where they had murdered Hart Northey, and where they had hid it. "How do you know?" he was asked. George replied, "I saw the foul deed committed in a dream I had the night of the murder, when at Street Helena. The pistol was found, as George Northey had predicted, in the thatch of the ruined cottage. Investigation revealed that the details of the crime were identical with those seen in the vision. It is a fact known to all occultists that many persons frequently travel in the astral body during sleep and in many cases retain a faint recollection of some of the things they have seen and heard during their travels in the astral. Nearly everyone knows the experience of waking up in the morning feeling physically tired and used up, in some cases a dim recollection of walking or working during the dream being had. Who among us has not had the experience of walking on the air, or in the air, without the feet touching the ground, being propelled simply by the effort of the will? And who of us has had not experienced that dreadful falling through space sensation, in dreams, with the sudden awakening just before we actually struck Earth? And who has not had the mortifying dream experience of walking along the street, or in some public place, and being suddenly overcome by the consciousness that we were in our night clothes, or perhaps without any clothing at all? All of these things are more or less distorted recollection of astral journeyings. But while these dream excursions in the astral are harmless, the conscious going out in the astral is not so. There are many planes of the astral into which it is dangerous and unpleasant for the uninstructed person to travel unless accompanied by a capable occultist as guide. Therefore, I caution all students against trying to force development in that direction. Nature surrounds you with safeguards, and interposes obstacles for your own protection and good. Do not try to break through these obstacles without knowledge of what you are doing. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Remember, and a little learning is a dangerous thing. When you have reached the stage of development in which it will be safe for you to undertake conscious astral explorations, then will your guide be at hand, and the instruction furnished you by those capable of giving it to you. Do not try to break into the astral without due preparation, and full knowledge, lest you find yourself in the state of the fish who leapt out of the water onto the banks of the stream. Your dream trips are safe. They will increase in variety and clearness, and you will remember more about them. All this before you may begin to try to consciously go out into the astral as do the occultists. Be content to crawl before you may walk. Learn to add, multiply, subtract and divide, before you undertake the higher mathematics, algebra, geometry, etc., of occultism. Lesson 15. Strange astral phenomena. There are several phases of astral phenomena other than those mentioned in the preceding chapters, which it will be better for the student to become acquainted with in order to round out his general knowledge of the subject. Although the manifestations are comparatively rare, and not so generally recognized in works on this subject. One of the first of these several phases of astral phenomena is that which may be called thought form projection. This manifestation comes in the place on the psychic scale just between ordinary clairvoyance on the one hand, and astral body projection on the other. It has some of the characteristics of each, and is often mistaken for one or the other of these phases. To understand this phenomena, the student should know something regarding the fact that thought frequently takes on astral form, and that these manifestations are known as thought forms. I have spoken of these in some of the preceding lessons. The ordinary thought form is quite simple, as a rule, and does not bear any particular resemblance to the sender thereof. But in some cases a person may, consciously or unconsciously, strongly and clearly think of himself as present at some other place, and thus actually create a thought form of himself at that place, which may be discerned by those having clairvoyant vision. Moreover, this thought form of himself is connected psychically with himself and affords a channel of psychic information for him. As a rule, these thought forms are only projected by those who have trained their minds and will along occult lines, but occasionally under the stress of strong emotion or desire an ordinary person may focus his psychic power to such an extent that the phenomena is manifested. Here I will quote from an English investigator of astral phenomena, who has had much experience on that plane. He says, all students are aware that thought takes form, at any rate upon its own plane, and in the majority of cases upon the astral plane also, but it may not be so generally known that if a man thinks strongly of himself as present at any given place, the form assumed by that particular thought will be a likeness of the thinker himself. which will appear at the place in question. Essentially this form must be composed of the matter of the mental plane, but in very many cases it would draw round itself matter of the astral plane also, and so would approach much nearer to visibility. There are, in fact, many instances in which it has been seen by the person thought of most probably by means of the unconscious influence emanating from the original thinker. None of the consciousness of the thinker would, however, be included within this thought form. When once sent out from him, it would normally be a quite separate entity, not indeed absolutely unconnected with its maker, but practically so as far as the possibility of receiving any impression through it is concerned. This type of clairvoyance consists, then, in the power to retain so much connection with and so much hold over a newly created thought form as will render it possible to receive impressions by means of it. Such impressions as were made upon the form would in this case be transmitted to the thinker not along an astral telegraph line, but by a sympathetic vibration. In a perfect case of this kind of clairvoyance it is almost as though the seer projected a part of his consciousness into the thought form, and used it as a kind of outpost, from which observation was possible. He sees almost as well as he would if he himself stood in the place of his thought form. The figures at which he is looking will appear to him as of life size and close to hand, instead of tiny and at a distance as in the case of some other forms of clairvoyance, and he will find it possible to shift his point of view if he wishes to do so. Clairaudience is perhaps less frequently associated with this type of clairvoyance than with the others, but its place is to some extent taken by a kind of mental perception of the thoughts and intentions of those who are seen. Since the man's consciousness is still in the physical body, he will be able, even when exercising this faculty, to hear and to speak, insofar as he can do this without any distraction of his attention. The moment that the intentness of his thought fails, the whole vision is gone, and he will have to construct a fresh thought form before he can resume it. Instances in which this kind of sight is possessed with any degree of perfection by untrained people are naturally rarer than in the other types of clairvoyance, because the capacity for mental control required, and the generally finer nature of the forces employed. I may mention that this particular method is frequently employed by advanced occultists of all countries, being preferred for various reasons. Some of the reasons of this preference as follows. A. The ability to shift the vision, and to turn around almost as well as in the case of actual astral body projection. This gives quite an advantage to this method over the method of ordinary clairvoyance. B. It does away with certain disadvantages of going out into the astral in the astral body, which only trained occultists realize. It gives almost the same results as astral body clairvoyance, without a number of disadvantages and inconveniences. In India, especially, this form of clairvoyance is comparatively frequent. This by reason of the fact that the Hindus, as a race, are far more psychic than are those of the Western lands, all else considered. And, besides, there are a much greater number of highly developed occultists there than in the West. Moreover, there is a certain psychic atmosphere surrounding India, by reason of its thousands of years of deep interest in things psychic and spiritual, all of which renders the production of psychic phenomena far easier than in other lands. In India, moreover, we find many instances of another form of psychic, or astral phenomena. I allude to the production of thought form pictures which are plainly visible to one or more persons. This phase of psychic phenomena is the real basis for many of the wonder tales which Western travelers bring back with them from India. The wonderful cases of magical appearance of living creatures and plants, and other objects, out of the clear air are the result of this psychic phenomena. That is to say, the creatures and objects are not really produced, they are but astral appearances resulting from the projection of powerful thought forms from the mind of the magician or other wonder worker, of whom India has a plentiful supply. Even the ignorant fakirs, I use the word in its true sense, not in the sense given it by American slang, even these itinerant showmen of psychic phenomena, are able to produce phenomena of this kind which seems miraculous to those witnessing them. As for the trained occultists of India, I may say that their feats, when they deign to produce them, seem to overturn every theory and principle of materialistic philosophy and science. But in nearly every case the explanation is the same: the projection of a strong and clear thought form on a large scale. Although I have purposely omitted reference to Hindu psychic phenomena in this book, for the reason given in my introduction, I find it necessary to quote cases in India in this connection, for the simple reason that there are but few counterparts in the Western world. There are no itinerant wonder workers of this kind in Western lands, and the trained occultists of the West of course would not consent to perform feats of this kind for the amusement of persons seeking merely sensations. The trained wills of the West are given rather to materializing objectively on the physical plane, creating great railroads, buildings, bridges, etc., from the mental pictures, rather than devoting the same time, energy and will to the production of astral low forms and pictures. There is a great difference in temperament, as well as a difference in the general psychic atmosphere, between East and West, which serves to explain matters of this kind. An American writer truly says, "The first principle underlying the whole business of Hindu wonder-working is that of a strong will, and the first necessary condition of producing a magical effect is an increase in the power of thought." The Hindus, owing to that intense love for solitary meditation, which has been one of the most pronounced characteristics from time immemorial, have acquired mental faculties of which we of the Western and younger civilization are totally ignorant. The Hindu has attained a past master's degree in speculative philosophy. He has for years retired for meditation to the silent places in his land, lived a hermit, subdued the body and developed the mind, thus winning control over other minds. In India, I have seen scenes of far distant places appearing as a mirage in clear air, even the colors being present to the scenes. This, though somewhat uncommon, was simply a remarkable instance of thought form projection from the mind of a man highly developed along occult lines. You must remember that in order to produce a picture in the astral, of this kind, the occultist must not only have the power of will and mind to cause such a picture to materialize, but he must also have a remarkable memory for detail in the picture, for nothing appears in the picture unless it has already been pictured in the mind of the man himself. Such a memory and perception of detail is very rare in the Western world. It is possessed by only exceptional artists. However, anyone may cultivate this perception and memory if he will give the time and care to it that the Hindu magicians do. You have heard of the Hindu mango trick, in which the magician takes a mango seed, plants it in the ground, waves his hands over it, and then causes first a tiny shoot to appear from the surface of the ground, this followed by a tiny trunk, and leaves, which grow and grow, until at last appears a full-sized mango tree, which first shows blossoms and then ripe fruit. In short, in a few moments the magician has produced that which nature requires years to do. That is, he apparently does this. What he really does is to produce a wonderful thought form in the astral, from seed stage to tree and fruit stage, the astral picture reproducing perfectly the picture in his own mind. It is as if he were creating a moving picture film roll in his mind, and then projecting this upon the screen of the air. There is no mango tree there, and never was, outside of the mind of the magician and the minds of his audience. In the same way, the magician will seem to throw the end of a rope up into the air. It travels far up until the end is lost sight of. Then he sends a boy climbing up after it, until he too disappears from sight. Then he causes the whole thing to disappear, and lo! the boy is seen standing among the audience. The boy is real, of course, but he never left the spot. The rest was all an appearance caused by the mind and will of the magician, pictured in the astral as a thought form. In the same way the magician will seem to cut the boy into bits, and then cause the severed parts to spring together and reassemble themselves. These feats may be varied indefinitely, but the principle is ever the same: thought form projection. Western visitors have sought to obtain photographs of these feats of the Hindu magicians, but their plates and films invariably show nothing whatever except the old fakir sitting quietly in the center, with a peculiar expression in his eyes. This is as might be expected, for the picture exists only in the astral, and is perceived only by the awakened astral senses of those present, which have been stimulated into activity by the power of the magician by sympathetic vibration. to be exact. Moreover, in certain instances it has been found that the vision is confined to a limited area. Persons outside of the limit ring see nothing, and those moving nearer to the magician lose sight of what they had previously seen. There are scientific reasons for this last fact, which need not be gone into at this place. The main point I am seeking to bring out is that these wonderful scenes are simply and wholly thought form pictures in the astral, perceived by the awakened astral vision of those present. This, to be sure, is wonderful enough, but still no miracle has been worked. I may mention here that these magicians begin their training from early youth. In addition to certain instruction concerning astral phenomena which is handed down from father to son, among them they are set to work practicing visualization of things previously perceived. They are set to work upon, say, a rose. They must impress upon their memory the perfect picture of the rose, no easy matter, I may tell you. Then they proceed to more difficult objects, slowly and gradually, along well-known principles of memory development. Along with this they practice the art of reproducing that which they remember, projecting it in thought form state. And so the young magician proceeds, from simple to complex things, from easy to difficult, until, finally, he is pronounced fit to give public exhibitions. All this takes years and years. Sometimes the boy grows to be a middle-aged man before he is allowed to publicly exhibit his power. Imagine a Western boy or man being willing to study from early childhood to middle age before he may hope to be able to show what he has been learning. Verily, the East is East, and the West is West, the two poles of human activity and expression. Another phase of psychic astral phenomena which should be mentioned, although it is manifested but comparatively seldom, is that which has been called telekinesis. By the term telekinesis is meant that class of phenomena which manifests in the movement of physical objects without physical contact with the person responsible for the movement. I understand that the term itself was coined by Professor Cowes, with whose works I am not personally familiar. It is derived from the two Greek words tel, meaning far off, and kinesis, meaning to move. This class of phenomena is known better in the Western world by reason of its manifestation in spiritualistic circles in the movement of tables, etc., the knocking or tapping on tables and doors, etc., all of which are usually attributed to the work of spirits, but which occultists know are generally produced, consciously or unconsciously, by means of the power in the medium or others present, sometimes both. I would say here that I am not trying to discredit genuine spiritualistic phenomena. I am not considering the same in these lessons. All that I wish to say is that many of the phenomena commonly attributed to spirits are really but results of the psychic forces inherent in the living human being. Under certain conditions there may appear, in the case of a person strongly psychic, and also strongly charged with prana, the ability to extend a portion of the astral body to a considerable distance, and to produce an effect upon some physical object. Those with strong clairvoyant vision may actually perceive this astral extension, under favorable circumstances. They perceive the astral arm of the person etc. dotting out, diminishing in size as it extends, just as a piece of flexible rubber shrinks in diameter as it expands in length, and finally coming in contact with the physical object it wishes to move or strike. Then is seen a strong flow of prana along its length, which, by a peculiar form of concentration, is able to produce the physical effect. I cannot enter into the subject of astral physics at this place, for the subject is far too technical to be treated in lessons designed for general study. I may at least partially explain the phenomenon, however, by saying that the projected astral arm acts in a manner almost precisely like that of an extended physical arm, were such a thing possible in nature. This astral body extension produces spirit raps on tables, table tilting and movement levitation, or the lifting of solid objects in the air, playing upon musical instruments such as the guitar, accordion, etc. In some cases it is able to actually lift the person himself from the floor, and carry him through the air. In the same way, it may also cause the movement of a pencil in a closed slate, or bit of chalk upon a blackboard. In fact, it may produce almost any form of movement possible to the physical hand. In the case of the levitation of the person himself, the astral arms, and sometimes the legs as well, extend to the floor and push up the physical body into the air, and then propel it along. There are many complex technical details to these manifestations, however, and in a general statement these must be omitted. Some who are firmly wedded to the spiritistic theory resent the statement of occultists that this form of phenomena may be explained without the necessity of the spirits. But the best ground for the statement of the occultists is that many advanced occultists are able to produce such phenomena, consciously, by an act of pure will, accompanied by the power of mental picturing. They first picture the astral extension, and then will the projection of the astral and the passage of the prana, or vital force, around the pattern of the mental image. In the case of some very highly developed occultists, the astral thought form of their body becomes so charged with prana that it is able to move physical objects. There are not mere theories, for they may be verified by any occultist of sufficiently high development. I do not wish to intimate that the mediums are aware of the true nature of this phenomena, and consciously deceive their followers. On the contrary, most of them firmly believe that it is the spirits who do the work, unaware that they are unconsciously projecting their astral bodies, charged with prana, and performing the feat themselves. The best mediums, however, will generally tell you that they strongly wish that the thing be done, and a little cross-examination will reveal the fact that they generally make a clear mental picture of the actual happening just before it occurs. As I have already stated, however, the best proof is the fact that advanced occultists are able to duplicate the phenomena deliberately, consciously, and at will. I do not think that detracts from the wonder and interest in the so-called spiritistic phenomena. On the contrary, I think that it adds to it. Again, invading the realm of the spirits, I would say that occultists know that many cases of so-called materialization of spirit forms take place by reason of the unconscious projection of the astral body of the medium. Moreover, such a projection of the astral body may take on the appearance of some departed soul, by reason of the mental picture of that person in the mind of the medium. But, it may be asked, if the medium has never seen the dead person, how can he or she make a mental picture of him or her? The answer is that the minds of the persons present who knew the dead person tend to influence the appearance of the nebulous spirit form. In fact, in most cases the medium is unable to produce the phenomenon without the psychic assistance of those in the circle. In this case, also, I would say that the advanced occultist is able to duplicate the phenomena at will, as all who have enjoyed the privilege of close acquaintance with such persons are aware. The fact the medium is usually in a trance condition aid materially in the ease with which the phenomena are produced. With the conscious mind stilled, and the subconscious mind active, the astral phenomena are produced with much less trouble than would be the case if the medium were in the ordinary condition. Now, I wish to impress upon the minds of those of my readers who have a strong sympathy for the spiritistic teachings that I recognize the validity and genuineness of much of the phenomena of spiritism. I know these things to be true. For that matter, it is not a matter of mere belief on my part. But I also know that much of the so-called spiritistic phenomena is possible without the aid of spirits, but by the employment of the psychic astral forces and powers as stated in these lessons. I see no reason for any honest investigator of spiritism to be offended at such statements, for it does not take away from the wonder of the phenomena and does not discredit the motives and power of the mediums. We must search for truth wherever it is to be found, and we must not seek to dodge the results of our investigations. There is too much wonderful phenomena in spiritism to begrudge the explanation that the occultist offers for certain of its phases. While I am on the subject of materialization, however, I would direct the attention of the student to my little book entitled The Astral World, in which I have explained briefly the phenomena of those planes of the astral in which dwell the cast-off shells of souls which have moved on to the higher planes of the great astral world. I have thus shown that many astral shells or shades, or other astral semi-entities may be materialized, and thus mistaken for the spirits of departed friends. I have also explained in the same little book how there are certain powerful thought forms which may be mistaken for spirit materializations. I have also shown how many an honest medium is really a good clairvoyant, and by reading the records of the astral light is able to give information which seems to come from the departed soul. All of these things should be familiar to the earnest investigator of spiritism. in order that he may be able to classify the phenomena which he witnesses, and to avoid error and disappointment. In this connection, before passing on to the consideration of other phases of psychic phenomena, I would say that one of the best mediums known to the modern Western world, a medium who has been consulted by eminent men, university professors, psychologists, and others, and whose revelations regarding past, present and future astounded careful and intelligent men of international reputation. This medium, at the height of her professional success, made a public announcement that she felt compelled, from conscientious motives, to assert that she had come to the conclusion that our message came not from departed spirits but rather from some unknown realm of being, brought hither by the exercise of some faculty inherent in her and developed to a high power in her for some reason, which power seemed to manifest more effectively when she shut off her ordinary physical faculties and functioned on a plane higher than them. I think that the student of the present lessons will be able to point out the nature of the phenomena manifested by this medium, and also the source of her power. If not, I shall feel disappointed at my work of instruction. Lesson 16. Psychic Influence. ITS Laws and Principles. One of the phases of psychic phenomena that actively engage the attention of the student from the very beginning is that which may be called psychic influence. By this term is meant the influencing of one mind by another, the effect of one mind over another. There has been much written and said on this phase of the general subject in recent years, but few writers, however, have gone deeply into the matter. In the first place, most of the writers on the subject seek to explain the whole thing by means of ordinary telepathy. But this is merely a one-sided view of the truth of the matter. For, while ordinary telepathy plays an important part in the phenomena, still the higher form of telepathy, that is, astral thought transference, is frequently involved. The student who has followed me in the preceding lessons will understand readily what I mean when I say this, so there is no necessity for repetition on this point at this place. At this point, however, I must ask the student to consider the idea of psychic vibrations and their inductive power. It is a great principle of occultism, as well as of modern science, that everything is in a state of vibration. Everything has its own rate of vibration, and is constantly manifesting it. Every mental state is accompanied by vibration of its own plane. Every emotional state or feeling has its own particular rate of vibration. These rates of vibrations manifest just as do the vibrations of musical sound, which produce the several notes on the scale, one rising above the other in rate of vibration. But the scale of mental and emotional states is far more complex, and far more extended than is the musical scale. There are thousands of different notes, and half notes, on the mental scale. There are harmonies and discords on that scale, also. To those to whom vibrations seem to be something merely connected with sound waves, etc., I would say that a general and hasty glance at some elementary work on physical science will show that even the different shades, hues and tints of the colors perceived by us arise from different rates of vibrations. Color is nothing more than the result of certain rates of vibrations of light recorded by our senses and interpreted by our minds. From the low vibrations of red to the high vibrations of violet, all the various colors of the spectrum have their own particular rate of vibration. And, more than this, science knows that below the lowest red vibrations, and above the highest violet vibrations, there are other vibrations which our senses are unable to record, but which scientific instruments register. The rays of light by which photographs are taken are not perceived by the eye. There are a number of so-called chemical rays of light which the eye does not perceive, but which may be caught by delicate instruments. There is what science has called dark light, which will photograph in a room which appears pitch dark to the human sight. Above the ordinary scale of light vibrations are the vibrations of the X-rays and other fine forces. These are not perceived by the eye, but are caught by delicate instruments and recorded. Moreover, though science has not as yet discovered the fact, occultists know that the vibrations of mental and emotional states are just as true and regular as are those of sound or light, or heat. Again, above the plane of the physical vibrations arising from the brain and nervous system, there are the vibrations of the astral counterparts of these, which are much higher in the scale. For even the astral faculties and organs, while above the physical, still are under the universal rule of vibration, and have their own rate thereof. The old occult axiom, as above, so below as below, so above, is always seen to work out on all planes of universal energy. Closely following this idea of the universality of vibrations, and intimately connected therewith, we have the principle of induction, which is likewise universal, and found manifesting on all planes of energy. What is induction? You may ask. Well, it is very simple, or very complex, just as you may look at it. The principle of induction, on any plane, is that inherent quality or attribute of energy by which the manifestation of energy tends to reproduce itself in a second object, by setting up corresponding vibrations therein, though without direct contact of the two objects. Thus, heat in one object tends to induce heat in another object within its range of induction. The heated object throws off heat vibrations which set up corresponding vibrations in the nearby second object and make it hot. Likewise, the vibrations of light striking upon other objects render them capable of radiating light. Again, a magnet will induce magnetism in a piece of steel suspended nearby, though the two objects do not actually touch each other. An object which is electrified will by induction electrify another object situated some distance away. A note sounded on the piano, or violin, will cause a glass or vase in some distant part of the room to vibrate and sing, under certain conditions. And, so on. In every form or phase of the manifestation of energy do we see the principle of induction in full operation and manifestation. On the plane of ordinary thought and motion, we find many instances of this principle of induction. We know that one person vibrating strongly with happiness or sorrow, cheerfulness or anger, as the case may be, tends to communicate his feeling and emotions state to those with whom he comes in contact. All of you have seen a whole room full of persons affected and influenced in this way, under certain circumstances. You have also seen how a magnetic orator, preacher, singer or actor is able to induce in his audience a state of emotional vibration corresponding to that manifested by himself. In the same manner the mental atmospheres of towns, cities, etc., are induced. A well-known writer on this subject has truthfully told us, "We all know how great waves of feeling spread over a town, city or country, sweeping people off their balance. Great waves of political enthusiasm, or war spirit, or prejudice for or against certain persons, sweep over places and cause men to act in a manner that they will afterward regret when they come to themselves and consider their acts in cold blood. They will be swayed by demagogues or magnetic leaders who wish to gain their votes or patronage, and they will be led into acts of mob violence, or similar atrocities, by yielding to these waves of contagious thought." On the other hand, we all know how great waves of religious feeling sweep over a community upon the occasion of some great revival, excitement or fervor. These things being perceived, and recognized as true, the next question that presents itself to the mind of the intelligent student is this: but what causes the difference in power and effect between the thought and feeling vibrations of different persons? This question is a valid one, and arises from a perception of the underlying variety and difference in the thought vibrations of different persons. The difference, my students, is caused by three principal facts, viz. 1. Difference in degree of feeling, 2. Difference in degree of visualization, and 3. Difference in degree of concentration. Let us examine each of these successively, so as to get at the underlying principle. The element of emotional feeling is like the element of fire in the production of steam. The more vivid and intense the feeling or emotion, the greater the degree of heat and force to the thought wave or vibratory stream projected. You will begin to see why the thought vibrations of those animated and filled with strong desire, strong wish, strong ambition, etc., must be more forceful than those of persons of the opposite type. The person who is filled with a strong desire, wish or ambition, which has been fanned into a fierce blaze by attention, is a dynamic power among other persons, and his influence is felt. In fact, it may be asserted that as a general rule no person is able to influence men and things unless he have a strong desire, wish or ambition within him. The power of desire is a wonderful one, as all occultists know, and it will accomplish much even if the other elements be lacking, while, in proper combination with other principles, it will accomplish wonders. Likewise, a strong interest in a thing will cause a certain strength to the thought vibrations connected therewith. Interest is really an emotional feeling, though we generally think of it as merely something connected with the intellect. A cold intellectual thought has very little force, unless backed up by strong interest and concentration. But any intellectual thought backed up with interest, and focused by concentration, will produce very strong thought vibrations, with a marked inductive power. Now, let us consider the subject of visualization. Every person knows that the person who wishes to accomplish anything, or who expects to do good work along any line, must first know what he wishes to accomplish. In the degree that he is able to see the thing in his mind's eye, to picture the thing in his imagination, in that degree will he tend to manifest the thing itself in material form and effect. Sir Francis Galton, an eminent authority upon psychology, says on this point, the free use of a high visualizing faculty is of much importance in connection with the higher processes of generalized thought. A visual image is the most perfect form of mental representation wherever the shape, position, and relations of objects to space are concerned. The best workmen are those who visualize the whole of what they propose to do before they take a tool in their hands. Strategists, artists of all denominations, physicists who contrive new experiments, and, in short, all who do not follow routine, have need of it. A faculty that is of importance in all technical and artistic occupations, that gives accuracy to our perceptions and justice to our generalizations, is starved by lazy disuse instead of being cultivated judiciously in such a way as will, on the whole, bring best return. I believe that a serious study of the best way of developing and utilizing this faculty, without prejudice to the practice of abstract thought in symbols, is one of the pressing desiderata in the yet unformed science of education. Not only on the ordinary planes is the forming of strong mental images important and useful, but when we come to consider the phenomena of the astral plane, we begin to see what an important part one's played by strong mental images or visualized ideas. The better you know what you desire, wish or aspire to, the stronger will be your thought vibrations of that thing. Of course, well, then, the stronger that you are able to picture the thing in your mind, to visualize it to yourself, the stronger will be your actual knowledge and thought form of that thing. Instead of your thought vibrations being grouped in nebulous forms, lacking shape and distinct figure, as in the ordinary case when you form strong, clear mental images of what you desire or wish to accomplish, then do the thought vibrations group themselves in clear, strong, distinct forms. This being done, when the mind of other persons are affected by induction, they get the clear idea of the thought and feeling in your mind, and are strongly influenced thereby. A little later on, I shall call your attention to the attractive power of thought. But at this point I wish to say to you that while thought certainly attracts to you the things that you think of them most, still the power of the attraction depends very materially upon the clearness and distinctness of the mental image, or thought visualization, of the desired thing that you have set up in your mind. The nearer you can actually see the thing as you wish it to happen, even to the general details, the stronger will be the attractive force thereof. But, I shall leave the discussion of this phase of the subject until I reach it in its proper order. For the present, I shall content myself with urging upon you the importance of a clear mental image, or visualized thought, in the matter of giving force and direction to the idea induced in the minds of other persons. In order for the other persons to actually perceive clearly the idea or feeling induced in them, it is necessary that the idea or feeling be strongly visualized in the mind originating it, that is the whole thing in one sentence. The next point of importance in thought influence by induction is that which is concerned with the process of concentration. Concentration is the act of mental focusing, or bringing to a single point or center. It is like the work of the sunglass that converges the rays of the sun to a single tiny point, thus immensely increasing its heat and power. Or, it is like the fine point of a needle that will force its way through where a blunt thing cannot penetrate. Or, it is like the strongly concentrated essence of a chemical substance, of which one drop is as powerful as 1 pint of the original thing. Think of the concentrated power of a tiny drop of attar of roses. It has within its tiny space the concentrated odor of thousands of roses. 1 drop of it will make a pint of extract, and a gallon of weaker perfumery. Think of the concentrated power in a lightning flash, as contrasted with the same amount of electricity diffused over a large area. Or, think of the harmless flash of a small amount of gunpowder ignited in the open air, as contrasted with the ignition of the same amount of powder compelled to escape through the small opening in the gun barrel. The occult teachings lay great stress upon this power of mental concentration. All students of the occult devote much time and care to the cultivation of the powers of concentration, and the development of the ability to employ them. The average person possesses but a very small amount of concentration, and is able to concentrate his mind for but a few moments at a time. The trained thinker obtains much of his mental power from his acquired ability to concentrate on his task. The occultist trains himself in fixing his concentrated attention upon the matter before him, so as to bring to a focal center all of his mental forces. The mind is a very restless thing, and is inclined to dance from one thing to another, tiring of each thing after a few moments' consideration thereof. The average person allows his involuntary attention to rest upon every trifling thing, and to be distracted by the idlest appeals to the senses. He finds it most difficult to either shut out these distracting appeals to the senses, and equally hard to hold the attention to some uninteresting thing. His attention is almost free of control by the will, and the person is a slave to his perceptive powers and to his imagination, instead of being a master of both. The occultist, on the contrary, masters his attention, and controls his imagination. He forces the one to concentrate when he wishes it to do so, and he compels the latter to form the mental images he wishes to visualize. But this is a far different thing from the self-hypnotization which some persons imagine to be concentration. A writer on the subject has well said, "The trained occultist will concentrate upon a subject or object with a wonderful intensity, seemingly completely absorbed in the subject or object before him, and oblivious to all else in the world. And yet, the task accomplished, or the given time expired, he will detach his mind from the object and will be perfectly fresh, watchful and wide awake to the next matter before him." There is every difference between being controlled by involuntary attention, which is species of self-hypnotization, and the control of the attention, which is an evidence of mastery. An eminent French psychologist once said, "The authority of the attention is subject to the superior authority of the ego. I yield it, or I withhold it, as I please. I direct it in turn to several points. I concentrate it upon each point, as long as my will can stand the effort." In an earlier lesson of this series, I have indicated in a general way the methods whereby one may develop and train his powers of concentration. There is no royal road to concentration. It may be developed only by practice and exercise. The secret consists in managing the attention, so as to fix it upon a subject, no matter how uninteresting, and to hold it for a reasonable length of time. Practice upon some disagreeable study or other task is good exercise, for it serves to train the will in spite of the influence of more attractive objects or subjects. And this all serves to train the will, remember, for the will is actively concerned in every act of voluntary attention. In fact, attention of this kind is one of the most important and characteristic acts of the will. So, as you see, in order to be successful in influencing the minds of others by means of mental induction, you must first cultivate a strong feeling of interest in the idea which you wish to induce in the other person, or a strong desire to produce the thing. Interest and desire constitute the fire which generates the stream of will from the water of mind, as some occultists have stated it. Secondly, you must cultivate the faculty of forming strong and clear mental images of the idea or feeling you wish to so induce. You must learn to actually see the thing in your imagination, so as to give the idea strength and clearness. Thirdly, you must learn to concentrate your mind and attention upon the idea or feeling, shutting out all other ideas and feelings for the time being. Thus you give concentrated force and power to the vibrations and thought forms which you are projecting. These three principles underlie all of the many forms of mental induction, or mental influence. We find them in active operation in cases in which the person is seeking to attract to himself certain conditions, environment, persons, things, or channels of expression, by setting into motion the great laws of mental attraction. We see them also employed when the person is endeavoring to produce an effect upon the mind of some particular person, or number of persons. We see them in force in all cases of mental or psychic healing, under whatever form it may be employed. In short, these are general principles, and must therefore underlie all forms and phases of mental or psychic influence. The sooner the student realizes this fact, and the more actively does he set himself to work in cultivating and developing these principles within himself, the more successful and efficient will he become in this field of psychic research and investigation. It is largely in the degree of the cultivation of these three mental principles that the occultist is distinguished from the ordinary man. It may be that you are not desirous of cultivating or practicing the power of influencing other persons psychically. Well, that is for you to decide for yourself. At any rate, you will do well to develop yourselves along these lines, at least for self-protection. The cultivation of these three mental principles will tend to make you active and positive, psychically, as contrasted with the passive, negative mental state of the average person. By becoming mentally active and positive, you will be able to resist any psychic influence that may be directed toward yourself, and to surround yourself with a protective aura of positive, active mental vibrations. And, moreover, if you are desirous of pursuing your investigations of psychic and astral phenomena, you will find it of great importance to cultivate and develop these three principles in your mind. For, then you will be able to brush aside all distracting influences, and to proceed at once to the task before you, with power, clearness and strength of purpose and method. In the following chapters I shall give you a more or less detailed presentation of the various phases or forms of psychic influence. Some of these may seem at first to be something independent of the general principles, but I ask that you carefully analyze all of these, so as to discover that the same fundamental principles are under and back of each and every instance presented. When you once fully grasp this fact, and perfect yourselves in the few fundamental principles, then you are well started on the road to mastery of all the various phases of psychic phenomena. Instead of puzzling your mind over 100 different phases of disconnected phenomena, it is better to master the few actual elementary principles, and then reason deductively from these to the various manifestation thereof, master the principles, and then learn to apply them. Lesson 17. Personal psychic influence over others. Psychic influence, as the term is used in this book, may be said to be divided into three general classes, viz. 1. Personal influence, in which the mind of another is directly influenced by induction while he is in the presence of the person influencing. 2. Distant influencing, in which the psychic induction is directly manifested when the persons concerned are distant from one another. And 3. Indirect influence, in which the induction is manifested in the minds of various persons coming in contact with the thought vibrations of the person manifesting them, though no attempt is made to directly influence any particular person. I shall now present each of these three forms of psychic influence to you for consideration, one after the other in the above order. Personal influence, as above defined, ranges from cases in which the strongest control, generally known as hypnotism, is manifested, down to the cases in which merely a slight influence is exerted. But the general principle underlying all of these cases is precisely the same. The great characters of history, such as Alexander the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Julius Caesar, manifested this power to a great degree, and were able to sway men according to their will. All great leaders of men have this power strongly manifested, else they would not be able to influence the minds of men. Great orators, preachers, statesmen, and others of this class, likewise manifest the power strongly. In fact, the very sign of ability to influence and manage other persons is evidence of the possession and manifestation of this mighty power. In developing this power to influence others directly and personally, you should begin by impressing upon your mind the principles stated in the preceding chapter, namely, 1. Strong desire, 2. clear visualization, and 3. Concentration. You must begin by encouraging a strong desire in your mind to be a positive individual, to exert and manifest a positive influence over others with whom you come in contact, and especially over those whom you wish to influence in some particular manner or direction. You must let the fire of desire burn fiercely within you, until it becomes as strong as physical hunger or thirst. You must want to as you want to breathe, to live. You will find that the men who accomplish the great things in life are those who have strong desire burning in their bosoms. There is a strong radiative and inductive power in strong desire and wish. In fact, some have thought this the main feature of what we generally call strong willpower. The next step, of course, is the forming of a clear, positive, distinct and dynamic mental picture of the idea or feeling that you wish to induce in the other person. If it is an idea, you should make a strong clear picture of it in your imagination, so as to give it distinctness and force and a clear outline. If it is a feeling, you should picture it in your imagination. If it is something that you wish the other person to do, or some way in which you wish him to act, you should picture him as doing the thing, or acting in that particular way. By so doing you furnish the pattern or design for the induced mental or emotional states you wish to induce in the other person. Upon the clearness and strength of these mental patterns of the imagination depends largely the power of the induced impression. The third step, of course, is the concentration of your mind upon the impression you wish to induce in the mind of the other person. You must learn to concentrate so forcibly and clearly that the idea will stand out clearly in your mind like a bright star of a dark night, except that there must be only one star instead of thousands. By so doing you really focus the entire force of your mental and psychic energies into that one particular idea or thought. This makes it act like the focused rays in the sunglass, or like the strong pipe stream of water that will break down the thing upon which it is turned. Diffused thought has but a comparatively weak effect, whereas a concentrated stream of thought vibrations will force its way through obstacles. Remember, always, this threefold mental condition: 1. Strong desire, 2. Clear mental picture, and 3. Concentrated thought. The greater the degree in which you can manifest these three mental conditions, the greater will be your success in any form of psychic influence, direct or indirect, personal or general, present or distant. Before you proceed to develop the power to impress a particular idea or feeling upon the mind of another person, you should first acquire a positive mental atmosphere for yourself. This mental atmosphere is produced in precisely the same way that you induce a special idea or feeling in the mind of the other person. That is to say, you first strongly desire it, then you clearly picture it, and then you apply concentrated thought upon it. I will assume that you are filled with the strong desire for a positive mental atmosphere around you. You want this very much indeed, and actually crave and hunger for it. Then you must begin to picture yourself, in your imagination, as surrounded with an aura of positive thought vibrations which protect you from the thought forces of other persons, and, at the same time, impress the strength of your personality upon the persons with whom you come in contact. You will be aided in making these strong mental pictures by holding the idea in your concentrated thought, and, at the same time, silently stating to your mind just what you expect to do in the desired direction. In stating your orders to your mind, always speak as if the thing were already accomplished at that particular moment. Never say that it will be, but always hold fast to the it is. The following will give you a good example of the mental statements, which of course should be accompanied by the concentrated idea of the thing, and the mental picture of yourself as being just what you state. Here is the mental statement for the creation of a strong, positive psychic atmosphere. I am surrounded by an aura of strong, positive, dynamic thought vibrations. These render me positive to other persons, and render them negative to me. I am positive of their thought vibrations, but they are negative to mine. They feel the strength of my psychic atmosphere, while I easily repel the power of theirs. I dominate the situation, and manifest my positive psychic qualities over theirs. My atmosphere creates the vibration of strength and power on all sides of me, which affect others with whom I come in contact. My psychic atmosphere is strong and positive. The next step in personal influence is that of projecting your psychic power directly upon and into the mind of the other person whom you wish to influence. Sometimes, if the person is quite negative to you, this is a very simple and easy matter, but where the person is near your own degree of psychic positiveness, you will have to assert your psychic superiority to him, and get the psychic upper hand before you can proceed further. This is accomplished by throwing into your psychic atmosphere some particularly strong mental statements accompanied by clear visualizations or mental pictures. Make positive your psychic atmosphere, particularly towards the person whom you seek to influence, by statements and pictures something along the following lines: I am positive to this man, he is negative to me, he feels my power and is beginning to yield to it, he is unable to influence me in the slightest, while I can influence him easily, my power is beginning to operate upon his mind and feelings. The exact words are not important, but the idea behind them gives them their psychic force and power. Then should you begin your direct attack upon him, or rather upon his psychic powers. When I say attack, I do not use the word in the sense of warfare or actual desire to harm the other person. This is a far different matter. What I mean to say is that there is usually a psychic battle for a longer or shorter period between two persons of similar degrees of psychic power and development. From this battle one always emerges victor at the time, and one always is beaten for the time being, at least. And, as in all battles, victory often goes to him who strikes the first hard blow. The offensive tactics are the best in cases of this kind. A celebrated American author, Oliver Wendell Holmes, in one of his books makes mention of these duels of psychic force between individuals, as follows: there is that deadly Indian hug in which men wrestle with their eyes, over in 5 seconds, but which breaks one of their two backs, and is good for 60 years and 10. One trial enough settles the whole matter, just as when two feathered songsters of the barnyard, game and dunghill, come together. After a jump or two, and a few sharp kicks, there is an end to it, and it is after you, monsieur, with the beaten party in all the social relations for all the rest of his days. An English physician, Dr. Fothergill by name, wrote a number of years ago about this struggle of wills, as he called it, but which is really a struggle of psychic power. He says, the conflict of will, the power to command others, has been spoken of frequently. Yet what is this will power that influences others? What is it that makes us accept, and adopt too, the advice of one person, while precisely the same advice from another has been rejected? Is it the weight of force of will which insensibly influences us, the force of will behind the advice? That is what it is. The person who thus forces his or her advice upon us has no more power to enforce it than others, but all the same we do as requested. We accept from one what we reject from another. One person says of something contemplated, "Oh, but you must not," yet we do it all the same, though the person may be in a position to make us regret the rejection of that counsel. Another person says, "Oh, but you mustn't," and we desist, though we may, if so disposed, set this latter person's opinion at defiance with impunity. It is not the fear of consequences, not of giving offense, which determines the adoption of the latter person's advice, while it has been rejected when given by the first. It depends upon the character or willpower of the individual advising whether we accept the advice or reject it. This character often depends little, if at all, in some cases, upon the intellect, or even upon the moral qualities, the goodness or badness, of the individual. It is itself an imponderable something, yet it carries weight with it. There may be abler men, cleverer men, but it is the one possessed of will who rises to the surface at these times, the one who can by some subtle power make other men obey him. Their will power goes on universally. In the young aristocrat who gets his tailor to make another advance in defiance of his conviction that he will never get his money back. It goes on between lawyer and client, betwixt doctor and patient, between banker and borrower, betwixt buyer and seller. It is not tact which enables the person behind the counter to induce customers to buy what they did not intend to buy, and which bought, gives them no satisfaction, though it is linked therewith for the effort to be successful. Whenever two persons meet in business, or in any other relation in life, up to lovemaking, there is this will fight going on, commonly enough without any consciousness of the struggle. There is a dim consciousness of the result, but none of the processes. It often takes years of the intimacy of married life to find out with whom of the pair the mastery really lies. Often the far stronger character, to all appearances, has to yield. It is this will element which underlies the statement, the race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. In Middlemarch we find in Lyjate a grand aggregation of qualities, yet shallow, hard, selfish Rosamund masters him thoroughly in the end. He was not deficient in will power, possessed more than an average amount of character, but in the fight he went down at last under the onslaught of the intense, stubborn will of his narrow-minded spouse. Their will contest was the collision of a large warm nature, like a capable human hand, with a hard, narrow selfish nature. Like a steel button, the hand only bruised itself while the button remained unaffected. You must not, however, imagine that every person with whom you engage in one of these psychic duels is conscious of what is going on. He usually recognizes that some sort of conflict is underway, but he does not know the laws and principles of psychic force, and so is in the dark regarding the procedure. You will find that a little practice of this kind, in which no great question is involved, will give you a certain knack or trick of handling your psychic forces, and will, besides, give you that confidence in yourself that comes only from actual practice and exercise. I can point out the rules, and give you the principles, but you must learn the little bits of technique yourself from actual practice. When you have crossed psychic swords with the other person, gaze at him intently but not fiercely, and send him this positive strong thought vibration: I am stronger than you, and I shall win. At the same time picture to yourself your forces beating down his and overcoming him. Hold this idea and picture in your mind: my vibrations are stronger than are yours, I am beating you. Follow this up with the idea and picture of, you are weakening and giving in, you are being overpowered. A very powerful psychic weapon is the following: my vibrations are scattering your forces, I am breaking your forces into bits. Surrender. Surrender now, I tell you. And now for some interesting and very valuable information concerning psychic defense. You will notice that in the offensive psychic weapons there is always an assertion of positive statement of your power and its effect. Well, then, in using the psychic defensive weapon against one of strong will or psychic force, you reverse the process. That is to say, you deny the force of his psychic powers and forces, and picture them as melting into nothingness. Get this idea well fixed in your mind, for it is very important in a conflict of this kind. The effect of this is to neutralize all of the other person's power so far as its effect on yourself is concerned. You really do not destroy it in him totally. You simply render his forces powerless to affect you. This is important not only when in a psychic conflict of this kind, but also when you wish to render yourself immune from the psychic forces of other persons. You may shut yourself up in a strong defensive armor in this way, and others will be powerless to affect you. In the positive statement, I deny, you have the occult shield of defense, which is a mighty protection to you. Even if you do not feel disposed to cultivate and develop your psychic powers in the direction of influencing others, you should at least develop your defensive powers so as to resist any psychic attacks upon yourself. You will find it helpful to practice these offensive and defensive weapons when you are alone, standing before your mirror and playing that your reflection in the glass is the other person. Send this imaginary other person the psychic vibrations, accompanied by the mental picture suitable for it. Act the part out seriously and earnestly, just as if the reflected image were really another person. This will give you confidence in yourself, and that indefinable knack of handling your psychic weapons that comes only from practice. You will do well to perfect yourself in these rehearsals, just as you would in case you were trying to master anything else. By frequent earnest rehearsals, you will gain not only familiarity with the process and methods, but you will also gain real power and strength by the exercise of your psychic faculties which have heretofore lain dormant. Just as you may develop the muscle of your arm by calisthenic exercises, until it is able to perform real muscular work of strength, so you may develop your psychic faculties in this rehearsal work, so that you will be strongly equipped and armed for an actual psychic conflict, besides having learned how to handle your psychic weapons. After you have practiced sufficiently along the general offensive and defensive lines, and have learned how to manifest these forces in actual conflict, you will do well to practice special and specific commands to others, in the same way. That is to say, practice them first on your reflected image in the mirror. The following commands, with mental pictures, of course, will give you good practice. Go about the work in earnest, and act out the part seriously. Try these exercises, here. Look at me. Give me your undivided attention. Come this way. Come to me at once. Go away from me. Leave me at once. You like me very much. You are afraid of me. You wish to please me. You will agree to my proposition. You will do as I tell you. Any special command you wish to convey to another person, psychically, you will do well to practice before the mirror in this way. When you have made satisfactory progress in the exercises above mentioned, and are able to demonstrate them with a fair degree of success in actual practice, you may proceed to experiment with persons along the lines of special and direct commands by psychic force. The following will give you a clear idea of the nature of the experiments in question, but you may enlarge upon and vary them indefinitely. Remember, there is no virtue in mere words. The effect comes from the power of the thought behind the words. But, nevertheless, you will find that positive words, used in these silent commands, will help you to fit in your feeling to the words. Always make the command a real command, never a mere entreaty or appeal. Assume the mental attitude of a master of men, of a commander and ruler of other men. Here follow a number of interesting experiments along these lines, which will be very useful to you in acquiring the art of personal influence of this kind. 7 valuable exercises. Exercise 1. When walking down the street behind a person, make him turn around in answer to your mental command. Select some person who does not seem to be too much rushed or too busy. Select some person who seems to having nothing particular on his mind. Then desire earnestly that he shall turn around when you mentally call to him to do so. At the same time picture him as turning around in answer to your call, and at the same time concentrate your attention and thought firmly upon him. After a few moments of preparatory thought, send him the following message, silently of course, with as much force, positiveness and vigor as possible. Hey there. Turn around and look at me. Hey. Turn around at once. While influencing him, fix your gaze at the point on his neck where the skull joins it, right at the base of the brain, in the back. In a number of cases, you will find that the person will look around as if someone had actually called him aloud. In other cases, he will seem puzzled, and will look from side to side as if seeking someone. After a little practice you will be surprised how many persons you can affect in this way. Exercise 2. When in a public place, such as a church, concert or theater, send a similar message to someone seated a little distance in front of you. Use the same methods as in the first exercise, and you will obtain similar results. It will seem queer to you at first to notice how the other person will begin to fidget and move around in his seat, and finally glance furtively around as if to see what is causing him the disturbance. You, of course, will not let him suspect that it is you, but, instead will gaze calmly ahead of you, and pretend not to notice him. Exercise 3. This is a variation of the first exercise. It is practiced by sending to a person approaching you on the street, or walking ahead of you in the same direction, a command to turn to the right, or to the left, as you prefer. You will be surprised to see how often you will be successful in this. Exercise 4. This is a variation of the second exercise. It is practiced by sending to a person seated in front of you in a public place the command to look to the right, or to the left, as you prefer. Do not practice on the same person too long. After succeeding at first, it is not right to torment people. Remember. Exercise 5. After having attained proficiency in the foregoing exercises, you may proceed to command a person to perform certain unimportant motions, such as rising or sitting down, taking off his hat, taking out his handkerchief, laying down a fan, umbrella, etc. Exercise 6. The next step is to command persons to say some particular word having no important meaning, to put words in his mouth while talking to him. Wait until the other person pauses as if in search of a word, and then suddenly, sharply and forcibly put the word into his mouth, silently of course. In a very susceptible person, well under your psychic control, you may succeed in suggesting entire sentences and phrases to him. Exercise 7. This is the summit of psychic influencing, and, of course, is the most difficult. But you will be surprised to see how well you will succeed in many cases, after you have acquired the knack and habit of sending the psychic message. It consists of commanding the person to obey the spoken command or request that you are about to make to him. This is the art and secret of the success of many salesmen, solicitors, and others working along the lines of influencing other people. It is acquired by beginning with small things, and gradually proceeding to greater, and still greater. At this point I should warn you that all the best occult teachings warn students against using this power for base ends, improper purposes, etc. Such practices tend to react and rebound against the person using them, like a boomerang. Beware against using psychic or occult forces for improper purposes. The psychic laws punish the offender, just as do the physical laws. Finally, I caution the student against talking too much about his developing powers. Beware of boasting or bragging about these things. Keep silent, and keep your own counsel. When you make known your powers, you set into operation the adverse and antagonistic thought of persons around you who may be jealous of you, and who would wish to see you fail, or make yourself ridiculous. The wise head keepeth a still tongue. One of the oldest occult maxims is, learn, dare, do. Keep silent. You will do well to adhere strictly to this warning caution. Lesson 18. Psychic influence at a distance. The second phase of psychic influence is that called distant psychic influence, in which psychic induction is manifested when the persons are distant in space from one another, not in the presence of each other. Here, of course, we see the principle of telepathy involved in connection with the process of mental induction, and in some cases even the astral telepathic sense is called into operation. The student who has followed my explanation and course of reasoning in the preceding lessons will readily perceive that the principle involved in this distant phase of psychic influence is precisely the same as that employed in direct personal psychic influence. As I have explained in an early lesson, it matters little whether the space to be covered by the psychic vibratory waves is but 1 foot or 1,000 miles, the principle is exactly the same. There are, of course, other principles involved in the case of two persons meeting face to face and calling into force their psychic powers. For instance, there is the element of suggestion and association, and other psychological principles which are not in force when the two persons are out of the actual presence of each other. But so far as the telepathic or astral psychic powers are concerned, the mere extension of space does not change the principle. The student who has developed his power of psychic induction in the phases mentioned in the preceding chapter, may begin to experiment and practice psychic induction at long range, if he so wishes. That is to say, instead of causing psychic induction in the minds of persons actually in his presence and sight, he may produce similar results in persons out of his sight and presence. The person may be brought into presence and psychic contact, for all practical purposes, by using the visualizing powers for the purpose of bringing him into the en-rapport condition. That is to say, by using the imagination to bring into the mind a strong clear picture of the other person, you may induce an en-rapport condition in which he will be practically in the same psychic relation to you as if he were actually before you. Of course, if he is sufficiently well informed regarding occult matters, he may shut you out by drawing a psychic circle around himself which you cannot penetrate, or by surrounding himself with psychic armor or atmosphere such as I have already mentioned in preceding lessons. But as he will not likely know anything of this, the average person may be reached in the manner just mentioned. Or again, you may establish en-rapport conditions by psychometric methods, by holding to your forehead an article which has been in the other person's possession for some time, an article worn by him, a piece of his hair, etc. Or, again, you may use the crystal to bring up his astral vision before you. Or, again, You may erect an astral tube such as I will mention a little further on in this chapter, and thus establish a strong en-rapport condition. Having established the en-rapport condition with the other person, and having thus practically brought him into your presence, psychically speaking, you may proceed to send him commands or demands. Just as you did in the phase of personal psychic influence previously mentioned. You act precisely as if the other person were present before you, and state your commands or demands to him just as you would were he seated or standing in your presence. This is the keynote of the whole thing. The rest is simply an elaboration and stating of details of methods, etc. With the correct principle once established, you may apply the same according to your own wishes and discretion. This phase of distant psychic influence is at the bottom of all the wonderful tales, stories and legends of supernatural powers, witchcraft, sorcery, etc., with which the pages of history are filled. There is of course always to be found much distortion and exaggeration in these legends and tales, but they have truth at the bottom of them. In this connection, let me call your attention to a very important psychic principle involved. I have told you that by denying the power of any person over you, you practically neutralize his psychic power. The stronger and more positive your belief in your immunity, and your denial of his power over you, the more do you rob him of any such power. The average person, not knowing this, is more or less passive to psychic influences of other persons, and may be affected by them to a greater or less extent, depending upon the psychic development of the person seeking to influence him. At the extreme of the sensitive pole of psychic influence, we find those persons who believe firmly that the other person has power over them, and who are more or less afraid of him. This belief and fear acts to make them particularly sensitive and impressionable, and easily affected by his psychic induction. This is the reason that the so-called witches and sorcerers and others of evil repute have been able to acquire such a power over their victims, and to cause so much trouble. The secret is that the victims believed in the power of the other person, and feared their power. The greater the belief in, and fear of, the power of the person, the greater the susceptibility to his influence, the greater the sense of power of neutralizing the power, and the disbelief in his power to affect them, the greater the degree of immunity. This is the rule. Accordingly, we find that persons in various stages of the history of the world have been affected by the influences of witches, sorcerers, and other unprincipled persons. In most cases these so-called witches and sorcerers themselves were under the delusion that they were assisted by the devil or some other supernatural being. They did not realize that they were simply using perfectly natural methods, and employing perfectly natural forces. For that matter, you must remember that magnetism and electricity, in ancient days, were considered as supernatural forces in some way connected with demonic powers. Studying the history of witchcraft, sorcery, black magic, and the like, you will find that the devotees thereof usually employed some psychometric method. In other cases they would mold little figures of clay, or of wax, in the general shape and appearance of the person whom they wished to affect. It was thought that these little figures were endowed with some supernatural powers or attributes. But of course this was mere superstition. The whole power of these little figures arose from the fact that they aided the imagination of the spell worker in forming a mental image of the person sought to be influenced, and thus established a strong en-rapport condition. Added to this, you must remember that the fear and belief of the public greatly aided the spell worker and increased his power and influence over these poor persons. I will give you a typical case, taken from an old German book, which thoroughly illustrates the principles involved in cases of this kind. Understand this case, and you will have the secret and working principle of them all. The story is told by an eminent German physician of the last century. He relates that he was consulted by one of his patients, a wealthy farmer living nearby. The farmer complained that he was disturbed every night by strange noises which sounded like someone pounding iron. The disturbances occurred between the hours of 10 o'clock and midnight, each and every night. The physician asked him if he suspected anyone of causing the strange trouble. The farmer answered that he suspected an old enemy of his, an old village blacksmith living several miles away from his farm. It appears that an old long-standing feud between them had broken out afresh, and that the blacksmith had made threats of employing his hex, witchcraft, powers on the old farmer. The blacksmith was reputed to be a sort of hex or male witch, and the farmer believed in his diabolic powers and was very much in fear of them. So you see, the ideal condition for psychic receptivity was present. The physician called on the blacksmith, and taking him by surprise, gazing sternly into his eyes, and asked him, "What do you do every night between 10 and 12 o'clock?" The blacksmith, frightened and disturbed, stammered out, "I hammer a bar of iron every night at that time, and all the while I think intently of a bad neighbor of mine who once cheated me out of some money, and I will at the same time that the noise will disturb his rest, until he will pay me back my money to get peace and quiet." The physician bade him to desist from his evil practices, under threats of dire punishment, and then went to the farmer and made him straighten out the financial dispute between the two. Thereafter, there was no more trouble. So you see, in this case all the necessary elements were present. First, there was the belief of the blacksmith in his own powers. This gave him self-confidence and psychic power. Then there was the belief and fear on the part of the farmer. This made him an easy subject, and very susceptible to psychic induction, etc. Then there was the action of the blacksmith beating the iron. This gave force and clearness to his visualization of the idea he wished to induce in the mind of the other. And, finally, there was his will employed in every stroke, going out in the direction of the concentrated wish and purpose of influencing the farmer. You see, then, that every psychic element was present. It was no wonder that the old farmer was disturbed. Among the Negroes of the South, in America, and among the Hawaiians we find marked instances of this kind. The Negro voodoo men and women work black magic on those of their race who are superstitious and credulous, and who have a mortal fear of the voodoo. You see, the conditions obtained are much the same as in the case of the German case just cited. Travelers who have visited the countries in which there is a large Negro population, have many interesting tales to recite of the terrible workings of these voodoo black magicians. In some cases, sickness and even death is the result. But, mark you this, it is only those who believe in, and fear, the power of the voodoos that are affected. In Hawaii, the kahunas or native magicians are renowned for their power to cause sickness and death to those who have offended them, or to those who have offended some client of the kahuna, and who have hired the latter to pray the enemy to sickness or death. The poor ignorant Hawaiians, believing implicitly in the power of the kahunas, and being in deadly fear of them, are very susceptible to their psychic influence, and naturally fall easy victims, unless they buy of the kahuna, or make peace with his client. White persons living in Hawaii are not affected by the kahunas, for they do not believe in them, neither do they fear them. Unconsciously, but still strongly, they deny the power, and are immune. So, you see, the principle working out here. Also, once you have the master key, you may unlock many doors of mystery which have heretofore been closed to you. We do not have to fall back on cases of witchcraft, however, in order to illustrate this phase of the use of psychic influence for selfish ends. In Europe and America there are teachers of a low form of occultism who instruct their pupils in the art of producing induced mental states in the minds of others, for purposes of financial gain or other selfish ends. For instance, there is a Western teacher who instructs his pupils to induce desired mental states in prospective customers, or others whom they may wish to influence for selfish reasons. This teacher tells his pupils to imagine your prospective customer, or other person, as seated in a chair before which you are standing. Make the imagined picture as strong as possible, for upon this depends your success. Then proceed to treat this person just as if he were actually present. Concentrate your will upon him, and tell him what you expect to tell him when you meet him. Use all of the arguments that you can think of, and at the same time hold the thought that he must do as you say. Try to imagine him as complying with your wishes in every respect, for this imagining will tend to come true when you really meet the person. This rule may be used, not only in the case of prospective customers, but also in the case of persons whom you wish to influence in any way whatsoever. Surely this is a case of employing psychic powers for selfish purposes, if anything is. Again, in Europe and America, particularly in the latter country, we find many persons who have picked up a smattering of occult knowledge by means of some of the many healing cults and organizations which teach the power of thought over physical diseases. In the instruction along the lines of distant mental healing, the student is taught to visualize the patient as strongly and clearly as possible, and to then proceed to make statements of health and strength. The mind of the patient, and that of the healer, cooperate and in many cases work wonderful cures. As you will see in the last lesson of this course, there is great power in the mind to induce healthful vibrations in the mind of others, and the work is a good and worthy one. But, alas, as is so often the case, the good teaching is sometimes perverted, and applied for unworthy and selfish ends. Some of the persons who have picked up the principles of mental healing have discovered that the same power may be used in a bad as well as in a good direction. They accordingly proceed to treat other persons with the object of persuading them to do things calculated to benefit the person using the psychic power. They seek to get these other persons under their psychic influence, and to then take advantage of them in some way or other. I hope that it is practically unnecessary for me to warn my students against evil practices of this kind. I trust that I have not drawn any students of this class to me. In case, however, that some of you may have been, or may be in the future, tempted to use your psychic powers improperly, in this way, I wish to caution and warn you positively against so doing. Outside of the ordinary morality which should prevent you from taking advantage of another person in this way, I wish to say to you that anyone so misusing psychic or astral powers will inevitably bring down upon his head, sooner or later, certain occult astral forces which will prove disastrous to him. He will become involved in the web of his own making, and will suffer greatly. Never by any means allow yourself to be tempted into indulging in any of the practices of black magic, under any form of disguise. You will live to regret it if you do. Employ your powers, when you develop them, for the good of others, or at least, for purely scientific investigation and knowledge. The scientific investigator of this phase of psychic influence will wish to become acquainted with what the occultists call the astral tube. In this phase of the phenomena, you manifest upon the astral plane, rather than upon the physical. The astral form of telepathy is manifested, rather than the ordinary form. While there are a number of technical points involved in the production of the astral tube, I shall endeavor to instruct you regarding its creation and use in as plain words as possible, omitting all reference to technical occult details which would only serve to distract your attention and confuse your mind. The advanced occult student will understand these omitted technicalities without being told of them. The others would not know what was meant by them, if mentioned, in the absence of a long stage of preparatory teaching. After all, the theory is not of so much importance to most of you as are the practical working principles. I ask your careful attention to what I have to say in this subject of the astral tube. The astral tube is formed by the person forming in his imagination, that is, on the astral plane by means of his imagination or visualizing powers, a tube or small tunnel between himself and the person whom he wishes to influence. He starts by picturing it in his mind a whirling vortex, similar to the whirling ring of smoke emitted from a coughing engine, and sometimes by a man smoking a cigar, about 6 inches to 1 foot in diameter. He must will the imagined vortex ring to move forward as if it were actually boring a tunnel through the atmosphere. When the knack of producing this astral tube is acquired, it will be found that the visualized tunnel seems to vibrate with a peculiar intensity, and will seem to be composed of a substance far more subtle than air. Then, at the other end of this astral tube you must picture the other person, the one whom you wish to influence. The person will seem as if viewed through the wrong end of an opera glass. When this condition is gained, there will be found to be a high degree of rapport between yourself and the other person. The secret consists in the fact that you have really established a form of clairvoyance between yourself and the person. When you have induced this condition, proceed with your mental commands and pictures just as if you were in the presence of the person himself. That is the whole thing in a nutshell. In order that you may have another viewpoint from which to consider the astral tube, or what corresponds to it, I wish to give you here a little quotation from another writer on the subject, who presents the matter from a somewhat more technical standpoint. Read this quotation in connection with my own description of the astral tube, and you will form a pretty complete and clear idea of the phenomenon. The writer mentioned says, "It is impossible here to give an exhaustive disquisition on astral physics. All I need say is that it is possible to make in the astral substance a definite connecting line that shall act as a telegraph wire to convey vibrations by means of which all that is going on at the other end of it may be seen. Such a line is established, be it understood, not by a direct projection through space of astral matter, but by such action upon a line, or rather many lines, of particles of that substance as will render them capable of forming a conductor for vibrations of the character required. This preliminary action can be set up in two ways, either by the transmission of energy from particle to particle, until the line is formed, or by the use of a force from a higher plane which is capable of acting upon the whole line simultaneously. Of course, this latter method implies far greater development, since it involves the knowledge of, and the power to use, forces of a considerably higher level. Even the simpler and purely astral operation is a difficult one to describe, though quite an easy one to perform. It may be said to partake somewhat of the nature of the magnetization of a bar of steel, for it consists in what we might call the polarization, by an effort of the human will, of a number of astral atoms reaching from the operator to the scene which he wishes to observe. All the atoms thus affected are held for the time being with their axes rigidly parallel to one another, so that they form a kind of temporary tube along which the clairvoyant may look. This method has the disadvantage that the telegraph line is liable to disarrangement or even destruction by any sufficiently strong astral current which happens to cross its path. But if the original creative effort were fairly definite, this would be a contingency of only infrequent occurrence. The view of a distant scene obtained by means of this astral current is in many ways not unlike that seen through a telescope. Human figures usually appear very small, like those on a distant stage, but in spite of their diminutive size they are as clear as though they were close by. Sometimes it is possible by this means to hear what is said as well as to see what is done, but as in the majority of cases this does not happen, we must consider it rather as the manifestation of an additional power than as a necessary corollary of the faculty of sight. I would feel that I had not done my whole duty to the student, or reader of this book, were I to conclude this chapter without pointing out a means of protection against the use of this phase of psychic influence against them on the part of some unscrupulous person, or for that matter, against the meddling influence of any person whatsoever, for any purpose whatsoever, without one's permission and consent. Therefore, I wish now to point out the general principles of self-protection or defense against this class of psychic influence. In the first place, you must, of course, refuse to admit to your mind any feeling of fear regarding the influence of other persons, for that is the open door to their influence, as I have pointed out to you. If you have been, or are fearful of any person's psychic influence, you must get to work and drive out that feeling by positive and vigorous denials. The denial, you remember, is the positive neutralizer of the psychic influence of another person, providing you make it in full belief of its truth. You must take the position, which is a true one, that you are immune to the psychic attack or influence. You should say, mentally, I deny to any person the power to influence me psychically without my consent. I am positive to all such influences, and they are negative to me. I neutralize them by this denial. If you feel sudden impulses to act in some way which you have not thought of doing, or toward which you have had an aversion, pause a moment and say, mentally, if this is an outside influence, I deny its power over me. I deny it, and send it back to its sender, to his defeat and confusion. You will then experience a feeling of relief and freedom. In such cases you may frequently be approached later on by the person who would have been most benefited by your action. He will appear surprised when you turn him down, and will act in a confused way. He may not have consciously tried to influence you, but may have merely been wishing strongly that you would do as he desired. It should encourage you to know that it requires much less force to repel and neutralize psychic influence of this kind. than is required to send forth the power. An ounce of denial and protection overcomes a pound of psychic attacking power. Nature gives you the means of protection, and gives you the best end of the stick, and it is your own fault if you do not effectively use it. A word to the wise is sufficient. Lesson 19. Laws of Psychic Attraction. The third phase of psychic influence is that which may be called indirect psychic influence, in which psychic induction is manifested in the minds of other persons coming in contact with the thought vibrations of the person manifesting them, although no deliberate attempt is made to influence the mind of any particular person or persons. Closely connected with and involved in this phase of psychic influence is that which is called the psychic law of attraction. So closely are these two connected that I shall consider them together in this lesson. The fundamental principle of this phase of psychic influence is the well-known psychic fact that mental and emotional states not only induce similar vibrations in those who are similar attuned on the psychic vibratory scale, but also tend to attract and draw to the person other persons who are vibrating along similar lines, and also tend to repel those who are vibrating in an opposing note or scale of psychic vibration. In the preceding lessons I have shown you how by induction we tend to arouse in others mental and emotional states similar to our own. But there is a law in effect here, which must be noted if you wish to thoroughly understand this phase of psychic influences. Omitting all technical explanations, and getting right down to the heart of the phenomenon, I would say that the general principle is this: psychic induction is difficult in proportion to the opposing quality of the characteristic mental and emotional states of the person affected, and easy in proportion to the harmonious quality thereof. That is to say, in plain words, that if a person's habitual thought and emotions are along the same lines that you are trying to induce in him, you will find it easy to induce the same in him. If, on the contrary, they are of an opposing nature, then you will find it difficult to so influence him. The many degrees of agreement and difference in the psychic vibrations of persons constitute a scale of comparative response to any particular form of mental or emotional vibrations. It is hard to change the spots of a leopard, or the skin of an Ethiopian, as we are told on ancient authority. It is almost as difficult to change the characteristic mental and emotional states of a person by psychic induction, except after long and repeated efforts. On the contrary, let a person have certain characteristic mental and emotional habits, then these may be aroused in them with the greatest ease by means of psychic induction. For instance, if a person is characteristically and habitually peaceful, mild and calm, it will be very difficult to arouse in him by psychic induction the vibrations of anger, fight and excitement. On the other hand, if the other person is combative, fierce and easily excited to wrath, it is the easiest possible thing to arouse these feelings in him by psychic induction. So much for ordinary psychic induction. Let us now consider indirect psychic induction, in which the same principle operates. In indirect psychic induction, that is to say in cases in which psychic vibrations are aroused by induction without deliberate attempt or design to influence any particular person or persons, there is noted the manifestation of a peculiar law of attraction and repulsion along psychic lines. This psychic law operates in the direction of attracting to oneself other persons who, actively or passively, vibrate on the same note, or on some note or notes in general harmony therewith. In the same way, the law causes you to repel other persons who vibrate on a note or notes in general inharmony or discord to yourself. So, in short, we go through life attracting or repelling, psychically, others in harmonious or inharmonious psychic relation to us, respectively. An understanding of this law and its workings will throw light upon many things in your life which you have not understood previously. You of course understand that you are constantly radiating currents of psychic vibrations, some of which flow out to great distances from you, and affect others often far removed from you in space. But you may not also know that on the astral plane there is manifesting a similar sequence of cause and effect. A strong emotional vibration, or a strong desire or will, tends to manifest on the astral plane by attracting or repelling others in psychic harmony or inharmony with you. This phenomenon is not so common as is that of ordinary thought vibrations from brain to brain, but it is far more common than is generally supposed. It is particularly marked in cases of men of strong desire and will, and strong creative imagination. These vibrations awakening response in the minds of those in harmony with them, tend to draw to one those other persons whose general character will fit in with the desires and ideas of the first person, or to repel those who are not harmonious therewith. This explains the peculiar phenomenon of strong men in business, politics and other walks of life, drawing and attracting to them other men who will fit in with their general plans and aims. This law works two ways. Not only do you draw such persons to you as will fit in with your plans and purposes, but you are attracted to them by the same law. Not only this, but you will find that through the peculiar workings of this law even things and circumstances, as well as persons, will seem to be molded by your strong desires and ideas, providing your psychic vibrations are sufficiently strong and clear. Have you never noticed how a strong, resourceful magnetic man will seem to actually draw to him the persons, things and circumstances that he needs to carry out and manifest his plans and designs? To many, not understanding this great law, these things have seemed positively uncanny and mysterious. But, nowadays, the big men of business and politics are beginning to understand these psychic laws, and to apply them deliberately and with purpose. Some of the great leaders in the business world, and in politics, are known to deliberately start into operation strong psychic vibrations, and to send out strong psychic currents of attraction, by the methods that I have already explained to you. They, of course, are filled with a more than ordinary degree of desire and will, and, in the second place, they create very strong and clear mental pictures of their plans working out successfully to a finish, then concentrate strongly on the thing, and lo, the effect is felt by all hands and on all sides. They treat the public, to use the term favored by some of the metaphysical cults of the day, by holding the mental picture of that which they strongly desire to come to pass, and by concentrating their thought and will strongly upon it. A favorite mental picture of some of these men, who have been instructed by teachers of occultism, is that of themselves as the center of a great psychic whirlpool, drawing to themselves the persons, things and circumstances calculated to bring success and realization to them. Others picture their thought vibrations flowing from them like the rings in a pond into which a stone had been dropped, influencing a constantly widening circle of other persons. Then they picture the persons being drawn to them in the manner just mentioned. They persist in this practice day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Is it any wonder that they draw to themselves that which they desire? Other persons of lesser caliber take similar advantage of the law in the same way, but on a smaller scale. In every community there are certain persons who seem to draw to themselves the patronage and custom of the community, in some peculiar way. In most cases this may be traced back to some form of psychic influence. I do not mean that these persons consciously and deliberately set these forces into operation. On the contrary, many of them do so more or less unconsciously, and without a knowledge of the underlying psychic principles involved. Such persons have stumbled on a portion of the psychic laws, and have used them more or less unconsciously and without understanding the real reason of the happening. They found out that certain mental states and certain mental pictures tended to produce certain results that they worked out, and so they continued them. Some of these men think of the whole thing as something supernatural, and get to believe that they are being helped by some supernatural power, whereas they are simply operating under a universal psychic law of cause and effect. In America, a number of teachers and writers have devoted much attention to this phase of the general subject of psychic influence. Cults have been formed upon this general basis, the main idea of their followers being that of attracting financial and other success by means of this phase of psychic force. One of the leading writers along this line says, "An individual who has cultivated the faculty of concentration, and has acquired the art of creating sharp, clear, strong, mental images, and who when engaged in an undertaking will so charge his mind with the idea of success, will be bound to become an attracting center. And if such an individual will keep his mental picture ever in his mind, even though it be in the background of his mind, when he is attending to the details and planning of his affairs, if he will give his mental picture a prominent place in his mental gallery, taking a frequent glance at it, and using his will upon it to create new scenes of actual success, he will create for himself a center of radiating thought that will surely be felt by those coming within its field of influence. Such a man frequently sees people as coming to him and his enterprises, and as falling in line with his plans. He mentally sees money flowing into him, and all of his plans working out right. In short, he mentally imagines each step of his plans a little ahead of the time for their execution, and he concentrates forcibly and earnestly upon them. It is astonishing to witness how events, people, circumstances, and things seem to move in place in actual life as if urged by some mighty power to serve to materialize the conditions so imaged in the mind of the man. But, understand, there must be active mental effort behind the imaging. Daydreamers do not materialize thought, they merely dissipate energy. The man who converts thought in activity and material being throws energy into the task, and puts forth his willpower through the pictured image. Without the rays of the will there will be no picture projected, no matter how beautifully the imagination has projected it. Thought pictured in mental images, and then vitalized by the force of the desire, and will, tend to objectify themselves into material being. The student will be interested in reading and hearing the various theories and explanations given by different writers and teachers to account for the phenomena of psychic influence. Once he has grasped the real scientific principles involved, he will be able to see the same in operation in all of the cases cited by the different teachers and writers, and will find that this fundamental principle fully explains and accounts for all of these cases, no matter how puzzling they may seem, or how mysterious they may be claimed to be by those mentioning them. Truth is very simple when we brush away the fantastic dressings which have been placed around it by those who have lacked knowledge of the true fundamental principles. We see this same law or principle operating in very many different ways from those previously mentioned. For instance, we frequently find cases in which one person has a strong desire for a certain kind of assistance in his business or other work. He has almost given up hope of finding the right kind of person, for those whom he has tried have failed to measure up the requirements of the situation. If he will, and he sometimes does, follow the general plan just mentioned, he will set into operation the psychic forces which will attract that person to him, and him to that person. In some peculiar way, the two will be thrown together, and the combination will work out to the best advantage of both. In these cases, each person is seeking the other, and the psychic forces of attraction, once set into operation, serve to bring them together. In like manner, one often draws to himself certain knowledge and information that he requires or is desirous of gaining. But, and you must always remember this, no miracle is worked, for it is simply a matter of the working out of natural laws of cause and effect, attraction and response to attraction on the psychic or astral plane. Such a person will accidentally run across some other person who will be led to give him the key to the knowledge he seeks. Perhaps a book may be mentioned, or some reference to some writer be made. If the hint is followed up, the desired information comes to light. Many persons have had the psychic experience of being led to some bookstore and induced to examine a particular shelf of books, whereupon a particular book presents itself which changes the whole course of the person's life. Or, perhaps, one will pick up a newspaper apparently at random, and without purpose, and therein will find some information, or at least a hint in the direction where the information may be found. When one accustoms himself to the workings of psychic forces, these things soon become accepted as a matter of course, and cease to arouse wonder or surprise. The workings of the psychic law of attraction is seen to be as natural and invariable as the law of gravitation, or magnetic attraction, once one has mastered its principles, and learned the methods of its application. Surely such a wonderful law is well worth study, attention, investigation, and mastery, isn't it? A writer along the lines of mental science, which is really based on the principles which have been stated in this book, has the following to say regarding his system: wonderful results arise by reason of what has been called the law of attraction, by the workings of which each person is continually drawing to himself the people, things, objects, and even circumstances in harmony and accord with his prevailing mental states. Like attracts like, and the mental states determine that which one draws to himself. If you are not satisfied with what is coming to you, start to work and change your mental attitudes and mental states, and you will see a change gradually setting in, and then the things that you want will begin to come your way. A most important fact about the effect of mental vibrations upon people lies in the principle that one is more affected by vibrations in harmony with his own accustomed feelings and mental states, than by those of an opposite nature. A man who is full of evil schemes, and selfish aims, is more apt to be caught up by similar vibrations than one who lives above that plane of thought. He is more easily tempted by evil suggestions and influences, than one to whom these things are abhorrent. And the same is true on every plane. A man whose mental attitude is one of confidence and fearlessness, is not apt to be affected by vibrations of a negative, pessimistic, gloomy nature, and vice versa. Therefore, if you wish to receive the vibrations of the thoughts and feelings of others, you must place yourself in a mental attitude corresponding with those vibrations which you wish to receive. And if you wish to avoid vibrations of a certain kind, the best way is to rise above them in your own mind, and to cultivate the mental states opposite them. The positive always overcomes the negative, and optimistic mental states are always positive to pessimistic mental states. Another writer on, and practitioner of mental science, in America, several years ago, explained her theory and practice by means of the term correlation of thoughts and things. She held that when one thought positively, clearly and forcibly of a thing, he related himself to that thing, and tended to attract it to him, and to be attracted toward it. She held that true wisdom consists in so managing our thoughts that we shall relate ourselves only to those things which we know to be desirable and beneficial to ourselves, and to avoid thinking of those which are harmful and detrimental to us. The student of this book will see how this practical mental scientist was really using the same principles that we have examined and become acquainted with in this book, although she called them by another name, and explained them by another theory. At the bottom of all the teachings and theories you will always find the one same basic principle and universal law. The advanced student of occultism knows that each and every one of us is really a creator of his own circumstances, environment and conditions. To a great extent, each of us is able to so modify our mental activities as to bring about such changes in our environment and surroundings as to actually recreate them. The things accomplished by successful men are really but materializations of that which they have previously held in their mental vision. Everything is first created on the psychic plane, and then manifested in the physical world. All the great works of man, the great bridges, great buildings, tunnels, machinery, cities, railroads, canals, works of art, musical compositions, etc., first existed in the mind of their creators, and were then afterward materialized in physical form and shape. And, so you see, we are proceeding with our work of mental creations whenever we think and make mental images. This, however, is no new teaching. It is as old as the race of mankind. Over 2500 years ago, Buddha said to his disciples, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts." I would be telling you but half the story did I not warn you that strong fear may play the part ordinarily filled by desire in the production of the psychic phenomena of materialization of mental pictures. Strange as it may appear at first, a strong fear that a thing will come to pass will act much the same as a strong desire that the happening will occur. Consequently, many persons, by continually dwelling upon the thing that they fear may happen to them, actually attract that thing to them, just as if they had actually desired and wished for it. I cannot go into occult technicalities in explaining this strange fact, but the gist of the secret may be said to consist in the fact that the person clearly and vividly pictures in his mind the thing that he fears may happen to him. He thus creates a strong mental picture or image of it, which sets into forces the attractive power of psychic influence and draws the feared thing into material reality. As Job said, "The thing that I feared hath come upon me." The moral of this is, of course, that persons should learn to stamp out fear and mental images of things feared. Instead, they should make strong positive mental denials of the things that they may find themselves fearing. They should deny the reality of the feared thing, and assert positively their own superiority to the thing, and their power to overcome it. A great religious cult has sprung into existence which makes a leading doctrine of this ability to materialize the things which one desires, and to deny out of existence undesirable things. Many persons who have witnessed the wonderful success of some of the followers of this cult or organization, have been puzzled to account for the same on scientific and rational grounds. A little understanding of fundamental occult and psychic principles, as given in these lessons, will show the why and wherefore of these strange and wonderful manifestations. In this connection you must remember that the combined thought of the thousands of persons composing this cult or organization undoubtedly gives additional psychic force to the mental affirmations and denials of the individual member thereof. In past and present, and probably in future time, there have been many instances of magical procedures tending to bring about the results that we have herein seen to come about by reason of psychic influence, in some of its many phases. These magic procedures have usually been accompanied by incantations, ceremonies, strange rites, evocations, etc., which were supposed to have great virtue in bringing about desired results. But the true occultists now know that these ceremonies and rites were merely hopes to the imagination and aids to faith, and thus tended to bring about the psychic phenomena. There was no virtue in these ceremonies themselves, and the same results may be secured by simply following the procedure outlined in this book. The wonders of ancient magic have been reproduced by the modern occultists, without all the mumbo-jumbo of the past rites and ceremonies. A gifted English writer upon the subject of the relation of mysticism and magic, sums up the gist of the principles of magic as follows. The central doctrine of magic may now be summed up thus: 1. That a supersensible and real cosmic medium exists, which interpenetrates, influences, and supports the tangible and apparent world, and is amenable to the categories both of metaphysics and of physics. This of course is the astral plane, which is the container of the subtle form or framework of all that exists on the physical plane. 2. That there is an established analogy and equilibrium between the real, and unseen, world, and the illusory manifestation that we call the world of sense. By this of course is meant the correspondence and balance between the subtle form of things and the material manifestation thereof. Things created in the astral, tend to materialize on the physical plane. All creation proceeds from the astral to the physical. 3. That this analogy may be discerned, and this equilibrium controlled, by the disciplined will of man, which thus becomes master of itself and of fate. The essence of will consists of strong desire accompanied by a clear mental picture of the thing desired, and held steady and firm by concentration. So you see by reference to the above very clear statement of the central doctrine of magic, and my explanations thereof, that in these lessons you have been taught the very essence of the wonderful, mysterious ancient magic, and its modern counterpart. As for the various rites and ceremonies, as I have said, these are mere symbols and aids to mental imaging and concentration. As an eminent occultist once said, ceremonies being but artificial methods of creating certain habits of the will, they cease to be necessary when these habits have become fixed. The master of occultism sees ceremonies, rites, and ritual as but the playthings of the kindergarten scholar, useful and important so far as they go, but serving merely to teach the scholar, sooner or later, that he may proceed without them. In this chapter 1 have condensed enough information to fill a whole book. I trust that you will study it carefully, and not miss its main points. Lesson 20. Psychic and magnetic healing. Probably no phase of psychic influence is more familiar to the average person of the Western world than is that of the healing of physical ills and conditions by means of psychic influence under one name or another. Great healing cults and organizations have been built up upon this basis, and the interest in the subject has taken on the form of a great popular movement. As is natural in cases of this kind, there have been hundreds of theories advanced to account for the phenomena of psychic healing, and a still greater number of methods of treatments devised to carry out the principles of the theories, ranging from the teaching of actual divine interposition and influence arising from certain forms of belief and practice, covering many intermediate stages. The theories even include a semi-materialistic hypothesis in which mind is considered as an attribute of matter, but having a magic influence over the forms of matter when properly applied. But it is worthy of note that no matter what the general or particular theory, or what the favored method of application, these healing schools or cults, as well as the independent practitioners, meet with a very fair degree of success and perform quite a number of cures. Many of these Western advocates and practitioners of psychic healing practically hold that the whole system is a very recent discovery, and that it has nothing whatsoever to do with ordinary occult science. The occultists, however, are able to smile at these ideas and beliefs, for they not only recognize the general principles involved, but they also are aware that these principles, and their application, have been known to advanced occultists for thousands of years. I do not say this in any disparagement of the modern schools of psychic healing, for I am in full sympathy with their great work. I merely mention the matter that the student may get the right historical perspective in considering this phase of psychic phenomena and influence. So far as the methods of application are concerned, the true occultist recognizes that most of the methods and forms of treatment are but outward cloaks or disguises for the real psychic healing principle. The gist of the real methods is to be found in the principles of the application of psychic influence which I have presented to you in these lessons, viz. 1. Strong desire to make the cure. 2. Clear mental image or picture of the desired condition as actually present in the patient at this time, and 3. Concentration of the attention and mind of the healer, so as to bring to a focus to two preceding mental states. Here you have the real secret of psychic healing methods. The rest are all elaborations thereof, dressed up forms and ceremonies which affect the imagination, faith, belief and confidence of the patient, and thus make the healing process much easier. In fact, with the proper degree of faith and confidence on the part of the patient, there is but little need of a healer, for the patient may treat and cure himself. However, in most cases, the presence of the healer aids materially in arousing the faith and confidence of the patient, and hastens the cure. Again, so far as the theories underlying the cures are concerned, occultists are able to reduce them all to a single working theory or principle, which includes all the rest. Brushing aside all technical details, and all attempts to trace back the healing process to the ultimate facts of the universe, I may say that the gist of the principle of all psychic healing is that of influencing the astral foundation of the various organs and parts, cells and centers, so as to make it proceed to manifest a more perfect physical counterpart. All psychic healing is really accomplished on the astral body first, then the physical body responds to the renewed activities of its astral counterpart. To get the real significance of this statement, it is necessary for you to realize just what the astral body really is. This once grasped, the difficulties vanish, and you are able to form a clear conception of the entire matter and process. The astral body is a precise counterpart of the physical body, its organs, its parts, its centers, and its cells. In fact, the astral body is the pattern upon which the physical body is materialized. The astral body is composed of an etheric substance of a very high rate of vibration. In one sense it may be considered as a very subtle form of matter, in another as a semi-materialized form of force or energy. It is finer and more subtle than the rarest vapors or gases known to science, and, yet, it has a strong degree of tenacity and cohesiveness that enables it to resist attacks from the material side of nature. As I have said, each organ, part, center or cell, of the physical body has its astral pattern or basis. In fact, the physical body has been built up, in whole and in all of its parts, on the pattern and base of the astral body. Moreover, in case of impaired functioning of the physical organs or parts, and impaired activity of the physical body, its limbs, etc. If we can manage to arouse the activities of the astral body, we may cause it to rematerialize or re-energize the physical body, and thus restore health and activity to it. If the liver, for instance, is not functioning properly, we proceed to start up the activities of the astral counterpart of that organ, to the end that the physical organ may be re-energized and recreated in a measure. All true psychic healing work is performed on the astral plane, before it manifests on the physical. At this point, I should also call your attention to the effect of prana, or life energy, in some cases of healing. This prana is what Western healers mean when they speak of human magnetism in their healing work. So far from being an imaginary force, as claimed by the physical scientists and materialists, it is known to all occultists as an active principle of the human body, and as of great efficacy in the psychic treatment of disease. I shall mention the details of this form of treatment as we proceed. I mention it at this place merely to call your attention to the fact of its existence. Before passing on to the consideration of other phases of the subject before us, I would like to call your attention to the fact that from the earliest days of history there have been recorded instances of some form of psychic healing. In the earlier days the psychic healing work was left entirely in the hands of the priesthood of the various religions prevailing in the several counties of the world. Claiming to have an exclusive divine sanction to perform healing work, these priests used various ceremonies, rites, incantations, etc., in order to obtain their results. In many cases these priests were ignorant of the real psychic forces invoked and set into operation. They merely practiced methods which had been found to work out effectively, and which had been handed down to them by their predecessors. In other cases, however, the priests undoubtedly were skilled occultists, and had a very full knowledge of the forces they were using, though, as the masses of the people were very ignorant, it was impossible to acquaint them with these things so far above their understanding, and, consequently, the priests applied the healing forces under the disguise of their religious ceremonies and rites. From time to time, however, as civilization progressed, there came into prominence persons who worked cures of physical ills by means of magical ceremonies and other similar methods, but who were outside of the priesthood. Some of these men undoubtedly had a very fair knowledge of the real secret of their cures, though they disguised them to suit the mental condition of their patients, and, also, probably for purposes of self-glorification. In other cases, however, it is probable that these healers had merely stumbled across the fact that certain things said in a certain way tended to work cures, or that certain physical objects seemed to have therapeutic virtue. They did not realize that the whole healing virtue of their systems depended upon the strong idea in their own minds, coupled with the strong faith and confidence in the mind of the patient. And so the work went on. In some of the oldest records of the human race, the scriptures of the various peoples, we find that laying on of hands was the favorite method employed by the holy men and priests, and other performing healing work. From the first there seems to have been an almost instinctive recognition on the part of men of the fact that there is a healing power in the touch of the hand. Even ignorant and savage mothers instinctively apply their hands to the hurt bodies of their children, a custom that has its counterpart in civilized races. By the way, the child is taught to expect physical relief from the application of the mother's hands, and its mind at once pictures relief. Not only is the mental picture created, but the desire and confidence is established in the minds of both persons. The same thing is true of all laying on of hands, and thus are the principles of all psychic influence brought into play. But this is not all there is to it. In the first place, there is an actual transference of prana from the body of the healer to that of the patient, which serves to energize and revitalize the cells and centers of the body of the latter. In the second place, there is the effect upon the astral body of the patient, which tends to materialize better physical conditions. In the third place, there is that combination and union of the minds of the two persons, which gives extra force and power to psychic influence. Is it any wonder that cures take place under these circumstances? In the modern revival of the almost lost art and science of psychic healing among the general public, there has been unusual stress laid upon the feature of absent healing, in which the patient and the healer are not in each other's presence. To many this has seemed actually miraculous, and as a positive proof of divine interposition. But a little thought will show the student that such cures are not unknown all in the pages of history, as a casual examination of the sacred books of almost any religion will show. Moreover, the student will see that to the effect of certain principles of psychic influence there needs but to be added the principles of telepathic communication, or, better still, the principles of astral communication by some phases of clairvoyance, to account for the entire phenomena of absent healing. Space is no barrier on the astral plane, as you have seen in the preceding chapters of this book. Once the en-rapport condition is established between healer and patient, and the rest is simple, the astral body is induced to energize more actively, and as a result the physical manifestation is improved and normal functioning restored. Of course, all this is wonderful enough, all psychic phenomena is, for that matter, but we see that we do not have to go outside of established occult laws, principles and facts in order to account for some of these modern miracles which have puzzled and perplexed so many good persons who have not known of the occult teachings, and who fear that the world is being turned upside down, and nature's laws overturned by these newfangled ideas and methods. Perhaps the most simple method of healing by psychic influence is that which is at the same time the oldest method, that is, the laying on of hands. This method was revived about 20 years ago in America and Europe by the new school of magnetic healing, which sprung rapidly into public favor. The other schools of psychic healing, generally known as mental healing, spiritual healing, divine healing, etc., generally frown upon the use of the hands in psychic healing, deeming it too material, and too much allied to hypnotism, etc. But this view is quite bigoted and narrow, for this method has no relation to hypnotism, and, moreover, it gives the patient the benefit of the flow of prana from the healer, while at the same time producing the psychic effect on the astral body. As I have just mentioned, I take the liberty of quoting here something on this subject from my little book entitled The Human Aura. In the chapter of that book devoted to the consideration of the subject of auric magnetism, I said, in cases of magnetic healing, etc., the healer by an effort of his will, sometimes unconsciously applied, projects a supply of his pranic aura vibrations into the body of his patient, by way of the nervous system of the patient, and also by means of what may be called the induction of the aura itself. The mere presence of a person strongly charged with prana is often enough to cause an overflow into the aura of other persons, with a resulting feeling of new strength and energy. By the use of the hands of the healer, a heightened effect is produced, by reason of certain properties inherent in the nervous system of both healer and patient. There is even a flow of etheric substance from the aura of the healer to that of the patient. In cases in which the vitality of the latter is very low, many a healer has actually, and literally, pumped his life force and etheric substance into the body of his patient, when the latter was sinking into the weakness which precedes death, and has by so doing been able to bring him back to strength and life. This is practically akin to the transfusion of blood, except that it is upon the psychic plane instead of the physical. But the true magnetic healer, call him by whatever name you wish, does not make this pranic treatment the all-in-all of his psychic treatment. On the contrary, it is but the less subtle part, which leads up to the higher phases. While treating his patients by the laying on of hands, he, at the same time, strives to induce in the mind of the patient the mental image of restored health and physical strength. He pictures the diseased organ as restored to health and normal functioning. He sees the entire physiological machinery operating properly, the work of nutrition, assimilation, and excretion going on naturally and normally. By proper words of advice and encouragement, he awakens help and confidence in the mind of the patient, and thus obtains the cooperation of that mind in connection to his own mental efforts. The astral body responds to this treatment, and begins to energize the physical organs and cells into normal activity, and the journey toward health is begun. In the little book just mentioned, The Human Aura, I gave some valuable information regarding the influence of colors in psychic healing, which I do not reproduce here as it is outside the scope and field of the present lessons. Those who may feel interested in the subject are respectfully referred to the little manual itself. It is sold for a nominal price by the publishers of the present work, in the form of psychic treatment which comes under the head of suggestive therapeutics. Great insistence is laid upon the verbal suggestion to the patient. On the part of the healer, the patient is told that he will get well, that his organs will function normally, etc., etc. But the student of the present lessons will readily see that the only virtue in the spoken words consists in their power to evoke and induce the mental image of the desired condition in the mind of the patient. The mental picture thus evoked produces a corresponding effect in the astral body of the patient, and sets into operation the materialization of desired results. In addition, the words produce a strong mental picture in the mind of the healer himself, and thus give form and strength to his psychic vibrations which are being poured out toward the patient. This is really the secret of suggestive treatment. The many cults of metaphysical healing, in America and Europe, lay great stress upon what they call affirmations, which are but statements of the patient of his or her faith in the healing power of God, or of mind, or spirit, or principle. Different names are used. The patient naturally has confidence aroused, and as naturally begins to picture the desired condition, this in turn reacting upon the astral body, and this upon the physical body or organ. In addition, the healer's mind is also set to work in the same way, and sets into motion the healing psychic forces in the way just mentioned. You will notice that the same principle is always involved and set into operation and manifestation. There is no particular virtue in the form of affirmation used by the healer or patient, except the important virtue of being able to arouse strong mental pictures of restored health, proper functioning, etc. There is of course this also. Certain forms of affirmations or mental statements are better suited than others to the particular wants of certain persons. For instance, a very religious person will be aroused better by affirmations and statements filled with religious sentiments and ideas, while a person of a purely scientific turn of mind will receive more benefit from affirmations in which the precise physiological functions are specifically mentioned, while the person who is fond of mystery and strange ceremonies will be better served in the affirmations or statements taken in the form of some magical incantation, etc. The difference, however, lies in the mind of the patient, rather than in the words themselves. Words are merely invokers of ideas, symbols of ideas. In themselves, words are nothing, ideas are everything. If you wish to treat yourself psychically for some physical disorder, or if you wish to do good to others in the same way, you have but to put into operation the general principles of psychic influence herein described. That is to say, you must first be filled with the strong desire and wish to make the cure. Then you must make a strong mental image of the desired result, as actually present. Do not think of it as going to be. Instead, say and think that it is now. Then concentrate the attention firmly and positively upon the idea. You may aid yourself and others by affirmations or auto-suggestions, words creating desired ideas and mental pictures. If you wish, you may get better results in this way. In this connection, let me remind you that the healing work in many cases consists largely in placing proper mental pictures in the mind of the patient, thereby displacing improper and harmful mental pictures of disease, etc., which have been given lodgment there before. Many persons are sick because of improper and harmful mental pictures that they have allowed to be placed there by the suggestions of others. Fear and dread of disease often acts to bring about the feared condition, for reasons that you can readily see. And, now, finally, for the work of absent healing by psychic influence, I can state this to you very simply. It is this: take what I have just told you regarding personal treatments, and combine it with what I have told you in previous lessons about long-distance psychic influence. Then you will have the whole thing. Here is a sample of an effective distant treatment or absent treatment. To use the popular term, it may be varied and enlarged up to fit individual cases. Sit quietly in your own room, inducing a calm, peaceful mental attitude and state. Then, in the way already told you in this book, make a mental picture of the patient as sitting opposite to you, or lying down in front of you. If you have never seen the patient, make simply a mental image of a man, or a woman, as the case may be, and think of the figure as being the patient. The best practitioners of distant psychic healing produce such a strong mental image of the patient that they can often actually feel his or her presence. This of course is the result of a simple form of clairvoyance. Then make a strong mental picture of the condition that you wish to induce in the patient, the healthy physical condition of the organ, or part or body, as the case may be. See this condition as existing at the present time, and not as merely to come in the future. At the same time, you will do well to mentally speak to the patient, just as you would in case he or she were sitting before you in the physical body. Tell the patient just what you would in such case. Pour in the suggestions, or affirmations, or whatever you may wish to call them. In some cases in which an excellent rapport condition is established, patients become aware of the treatment, and sometimes can almost see and feel the presence of the healer. A prominent mental scientist, of America, instructs his pupils to consider each of the organs of the patient, or of themselves, as having a separate intelligence and, therefore, to speak up to it as if it really understood what was being said to its organ mind. I would say that such form of treatment would be calculated to bring about very good results. Indeed, the principle of concentration and mental picturing would be invoked very strongly in such a case, and the astral counterpart of the organ should respond to such treatment quickly and effectively. It is an occult fact that there is mind in every organ and cell of the body, and if the same is awakened in the astral counterpart, it will respond to the command, suggestion, or direction. The writer in question evidently is well acquainted with this occult law, judging from his other writings, and has simply veiled his knowledge with this easily understood method of treatment, which undoubtedly will do the work, to use the American term. Finally, no matter what may be the theory, or method, given in connection with psychic healing of any or all kinds, you will find the same general principles underlying it that have been presented over and over again in this book. In fact, many purely material and physical remedies owe their success to the fact that they appeal to the imagination of the patient, and also inspire confidence in him. Anything that will inspire confidence, faith and hope in the mind of a patient, and will bring to his mind strong mental pictures of restored health and normal functioning of his organs, that thing will make for health for him. So, you have the whole theory and practice in a sentence. I would remind the student that these are not lessons to be read but once and then laid aside. In order to get from them all that they contain for you, you will find it necessary to read them several times, with a reasonable interval between readings for the knowledge to sink into your mind. I feel sure that you will find with each reading that there are many points that you overlooked before. The lessons cover a wide field, with many little excursions into bypaths and lanes of thought. I trust that the reading and study will make you not only a wiser person, but also a stronger and more efficient one. I thank you for your kind attention, and trust that we shall meet again in the future.